Okay. What did I do with my piece of paper here? I hit it. I hit it. I hit it. I hit it. I had it. What did I do with it? Yeah, I just had it. Oh, here it is. Okay, let me call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Board meeting for today, Friday, April 11th. If you'll please rise for the pledge. Charlotte, would you lead us, please?
Place your hand over your heart and join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Here.
Director Craven?
here.
Director Bennett?
Here.
Director Kelly?
Here.
Director Borchert?
Here. Okay, Dave Schwabauer, Bob Aranio, Andy Waters are in the audience as alternates. I don't see any other alternates. Okay. Agenda review, Jeff?
No changes, Chair.
All right. So the agenda stands as it's indicated. Public comments, opportunity for the public to address the board on non-agenda items. Anyone? Okay. Let's talk about board member comments. Anybody?
I do. Yes. For those of you who were here at the previous hearings, you'll notice that Mr. Andrews was here before and that I'm here now. I need to say that due to a medical problem, I was not able to be here. However, I did listen to all of the meetings via the internet replay mechanism, whatever it's called in techie terms. And I did get the idea loud and clear that nobody wants his own water usage cut, and very few of you care if somebody else's water usage is cut. I also want to say that I'm here too, and Mr. Andrews was too, and we're here with all of us representing somebody. We represent cities. And so our job, or my job now, is to make sure that the municipalities are not cut in an unfair manner. And so the questions I'll be asking later will be along those lines, just so you understand where I'm coming from, since I wasn't at the previous meetings. And I know a lot of you were at those meetings and are not some of the people who are always here. And so, having said that, I just wanted to make sure everybody knew I had listened to the previous meetings on the internet.
Okay. Any other members? As I've said at the last few meetings we've had on this issue, I look around the room and I see a lot of familiar faces. Many of you have been at these meetings. There's a few of you that have not, either these series of meetings we're having or any of the GMA meetings. So for those of you that have heard this little speech before, you get to hear it again. For those of you that haven't heard it, one of the things we've done at the GMA over a long period of time is we've tried to run this thing as much as a town hall meeting as we can. And you'll notice there's no speaker cards, there's no series of lights, buzzers, and bells. And we've tried to let folks say their piece without getting carried away. And given the fact that we have a large audience, if everybody wanted to speak and repeat what they've said before on the same issues, we're going to be here until midnight, and I'm not sure that's what any of us want to do. This is the third, maybe the fourth meeting in this series. I know there's some people that do want to speak. I'll allow you to speak. If, in the sake of trying to keep this thing moving along, I'm going to reserve the right to interrupt at times if I have to move the ball down the road. But if you use your own self-discipline and recognize that behind you is a whole room of folks, and time could just go on if we don't get to the subject, it seems to have worked in the last few meetings. So there are some folks that have indicated to me they think we ought to have speaker cards and set time limits, and that's not the history of how we've done business. And I think that this is an important meeting. It's the biggest group we've ever had on a single subject, and I don't think this is the time to change the way we've been doing business for the last 26 years, for the time I've been here. So it's self-discipline. We're going to try that. If it works, it works, but we need to move the ball down the road, okay? Let's deal with action item number 1. Okay,
Ready?
please. Yes.
Okay. For the record, Gerhard Hubner, Watershed Protection District, Fox Canyon GMA staff. I'll be presenting this item. This item is item number 1, a proposed drought emergency ordinance E. So a little humor, a little icebreaker. I've done this on several occasions just to start this afternoon. Note the ark in the background. So those of you who have seen Noah's Ark. Let's go back. So I'm going to start, as I've done in previous presentations, discussing some of the current conditions statewide and locally. It's a picture of a grower on his farm in the Central Valley under some of the distress conditions that occur there. This is the U.S. seasonal drought outlook from NOAA for March 20th through June 30th for California, as you can see on the left. The legend has a drought persisting or intensifying. This is a U.S. drought monitor for California. This is the April 10th version, still in the exceptional extreme drought category. Snow surveys in the Sierra, as you can see, very little coverage evident. They experienced the third lowest recorded snowpack, lowest April 1st reading since 1988 at 32% of normal. Briefly, so far this season, we've had 5.3 inches of rain. 12 inches is normal here at the County Government Center. We're essentially at the end of the wet season with the conclusion of March. And to date, the DWR has not changed its zero allocation to the state water contractors. What are some of the others doing, or what are some of the effects? Mentioned, of course, the governor's order many times, 20% call for cutbacks. United on March 12th had their drought declaration. Cayugas, I understand, adopted a drought conservation resolution. Our neighboring communities, city of Santa Barbara, they have mandatory conservation expected this summer, considering restarting their desal plant. In our neighboring county up in San Luis Obispo, they have very depressed groundwater levels in the Paso Robles areas, as well as Napomo Mesa. Some of our agency basin conditions. Water levels continue to be below sea level, some cases substantially, for the Forebay, Oxnard Plain, Pleasant Valley, and West Las Posas basins. The latest month-to-month measurements have shown a few feet increase in several wells. I'll highlight that in a moment. The storage value is now at 96,300 acre-feet, 1,700 acre-feet less than last month, 32,200 acre-feet greater than last year. Again, the 80,000 acre-feet storage value is key. It relates to mean sea level. And this last bullet, the dry weather flows, that was something I reported the last meeting. That also hasn't changed. Familiar graphic to you, many. This is straight out of the United agenda from April 9th. You can see that water levels have risen in a few wells. However, the BMOs, as you can see in red, continue to be substantially below where they should be. Available storage in the Forebay, again, out of the April 9th United agenda package. Slight bump, very slight. You would expect that with springtime conditions. So let's turn to how this all started. Back in January 27, at the board hearing, we discussed various options. At that time, the board directed us to prepare an emergency ordinance, including considering reductions. Moving on now to the February 26th board meeting, a draft emergency ordinance was prepared, and it had several components, including groundwater reductions by operator, limitations on use of credits, prohibition on new extraction facilities, wells in this example, ordinance duration and effective date. At the conclusion of this meeting, the board directed the item back to a March 14th special board meeting with instructions to consider the feedback and input received and revise the ordinance as appropriate. Moving on now to our March 14th meeting, the board convened another hearing on draft emergency ordinance E. The staff presentation consisted of 3 parts: the current conditions, local and statewide, the agency's issues magnified by the drought, and the revised draft emergency ordinance E. We also made several key points, including that the agency's act goal of safe yield by 2010 was not being met. The 2007 groundwater management plan, basin management objectives were not being met. Water level declines in all basins, the unsustainability of the current agency allocation scheme, increase in time of planted acres of water-intensive crops, and the continued unabated threats to the resource, seawater intrusion, water quality degradation, and land subsidence.
I'm just like you to stop right there, just because it's more appropriate for me to make this comment here than it will be later in the hearing. Many of those key points that you see there in the 6 bullets that you have at the bottom are not directly related to the drought that we're in now. Unsustainability of the current agency allocation scheme, whether we're in a drought or not, we've recognized that we still have to have further cuts, et cetera. And so I just want to emphasize to people, regardless of what rainfalls come in the future, we all recognize we have work to do in terms of the long-range modifications to how the GMA has been operating to get there. So just want to get that said. Thank you very much.
The board also heard numerous stakeholder testimony regarding the March 14th version of the emergency ordinance. At the conclusion of the meeting and after deliberations, the board directed staff to continue the item to April 4th, now April 11th, sent out the next version of the ordinance by the morning of March 26th. We extended it to April 4th with this new April 11th date. Some of the direction that we heard was to consider changes regarding tree crops or a baseline crop allocation, regarding the temporary extraction allocation, to consider additional year or years in the averaging period, as well as other sources of water in the calculation, to consider the duration, potentially a sunset date, and for well permits to include some explicit language to include standby wells as exempt from the prohibition. So some of the agency staff's subsequent actions included many phone conversations and many meetings, substantial meetings with both municipal and industrial as well as agricultural operators. We conducted a significant amount of data analysis looking at various operators' extraction history over time, the agricultural operators' irrigation allowance filings, implications of any adjustments to this irrigation allowance. A copy of the revised ordinance was made available to the public and the board on on April 4th, as I mentioned earlier, with the final April 11th special board meeting agenda package sent out this past Tuesday. I throw this graphic up here to highlight the agency's historical reported extraction from our annual reports over time, so essentially the entire history of the agency. Above, in the upper corners, you will see the 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 28-year averages shown in the middle column. On the far right is the values calculated when you subtract the 100,000 acre-foot safe yield cumulative target. So I've highlighted for this example the 10-year that's pointed out in red.
You might point out, Gerhard, that curiously enough, the 10-year average is about 20% over the safe yield in the groundwater management plan of 2007.
So moving on now to the emergency ordinance and the various components in it. So let's start with the reduction of groundwater extractions and our rationale. The phased 20% reduction over 18 months is consistent with the governor's drought declaration and other agencies' efforts. And as we pointed out before, the agencies need to achieve groundwater basin sustainability. I also want to point out that stakeholder, existing groundwater management plan, and technical information support reductions on an equitable basis. And the 20% reduction is consistent with the agency's safe yield structural deficit. So this is what Jeff was just referring to. If you take that 124,000, 125,000 cumulative, and you do the math on 20%, that'll give you the 20%. To further highlight this, here's a 10-year average, 124,500. Minus 100,000 gets you the 24,500, or approximately a 20% reduction. If you then allocate that, and based on the data that we have, it's approximately 1/3 to the municipal industrial operators, or 8,000 acre feet, and 2/3 to the agricultural operators at 16,000. As I pointed out at the March 14th meeting, the reduction is stepwise. We've created a new term labeled temporary extraction allocation, which replaces all allocation regardless of type based on the operator's average 10-year. Now, this is a change. We had previously 3-year annual reported extractions, not including extractions that incur surcharges. We've included language for the Port Hueneme Water Agency to enable them to calculate their temporary extraction allocation, recognizing that they had a unique situation with their historical allocation, the relationship with the groundwater pumped and delivered to them by United, and the agency's approved January 24th, 1996 agreement. This is the proposed phase schedule for reductions and the formulas for calculating the adjusted temporary emergency allocations for M&I operators. So it begins July 1st, 2014. The next stepwise is in January of 2015. The following one occurs July 1st, 2015. And the final one goes fully into effect January 1st, 2016. So moving on now to our agricultural operators, and I have quite a few slides here to kind of describe the thought process that went into some of the changes that you see. So to address some of the comments and concerns raised by agricultural operators, we took an extensive analysis of calendar year 2013 irrigation allowance filings. The past year was the first year by agricultural operators under this program approved by the board back in October 2011. We examined data for the year, compared it with various crop types, zones. We have three: Camarillo, Oxnard, and Santa Paula. The water allowance values, the reported groundwater extracted, the reported water applied, and the irrigation allowance values. Then we took these and ran various scenarios. So calculated the various scenarios to determine what the implications would be to their irrigation allowance if they had a 20%, 30%, or 40% adjusted value. Here are some of the other statistics that we found looking at the filings: that current irrigated acreage is approximately 51,000 acres, that the filings for calendar year 2012 covered approximately 18,000. So far this year, or the filings that we've received this year for 2013 have equaled about 14,000. We do expect them to be pretty close to 2012. Just want to put this before you that having all agricultural operators file under irrigation efficiency, this program would represent a 180% increase in filings within the agencies. And of course, probably it goes without saying, this would be a significant undertaking. Additional staffing, account servicing, outreach, and training to the agricultural community would be needed. So for calendar year 2013, we had 135 applications received so far. When we calculated the cumulative irrigation allowance index average, it equaled 0.647. For comparison, we have, I'll go to the third bullet, acceptable for 2012 is a 1.2 ratio, but reduced for this calendar year would be 1. So ultimately, this ratio of applied water divided by the annual irrigation allowance is supposed to equal 1. So if we were to apply all the applications for 2013, they would all meet the 1.2 value. And if we applied the 1, 7% of our operators wouldn't meet that ratio. So when we completed our analysis and we looked and we ran the scenarios and we did the 20% adjusted value scenario, we found that consistently growers could achieve that adjusted value. When we ran the scenario at the 30% adjusted values, many could achieve that as well, but several could not. And so
Wait a minute.
Yes.
On the first one, you said could achieve. Up there, it says consistently achieve. There's a difference in the possibility of getting there and already doing it. I got a second question based on what you say here.
Okay.
Are they
restate your question.
consistently achieving that, or is there a possibility that they could achieve that? Because in the staff report, it does say consistently achieve.
When we looked at the values, they could achieve it. I guess that's, and I
Okay,
they
so
say
that's not
consistently.
correct then up there. If they consistently achieve it, it means they're doing it now and have been.
Board Member Craven, when we get the reports in, they're aggregated. So some person might be growing 5 different crops, but their reported IAI would be 0.64 for the 5. But among the 5, there may be one that can't achieve that. So they can consistently, if you apply it to the way it was reported in the gross number, they can achieve it, but not for every crop in there. Maybe that's part of the confusion, and we'll have a little bit more on that later. If you look at that table, some of the crops in there have a little more factor of safety, or a lot more factor of safety than others. But when we get the reports, the level of resolution we have is just everything is aggregated. And they're all meeting it on that aggregated basis.
Okay. Well, where I was going with this, and I'm interrupting because it's something I was going to go back and ask about later, but since we're there, I may as well ask it now. I only know what I read in the staff reports. And so if my question has been, if they're already achieving it, it says consistently achieve, then is there actually going to be a reduction in usage?
The answer to that question is not with the first cut to these numbers. We don't expect that. We expect that we've only got 1 year of reporting on the irrigation efficiency or the irrigation indexing. And we do know that they're going to have to do 16,000 acre feet in cuts at the same time that M&I is doing 8,000. The train's going to leave the station a little later for ag than it does for M&I, but it's going to arrive at the same place at the same time under the scenario that we're describing for you. So ag will face steeper cuts later in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Director Craven, some of us did independent research a tiny bit, if you would. Yes, some operators achieved savings and others didn't. I think that portion is correct. Across the board, though, it was not a 20%. People were not already operating at 20% less than the allowed. The average was more like about 10 to 15%. And that was not all operators. Some were actually exceeding it on those crops which require a little more intense amount of irrigation than was originally allowed by the study by Dr. Stiles. And so I think that exec officer's statement is a little optimistic. With the proposed 25%, I think we're probably going to see a real water savings of a minimum of 10%. And that's real water is what I'm thinking. The only thing that will make it not quite that way is if we're bringing all the historical allocation people in, and heretofore we haven't had that under irrigation efficiency. And therefore, those are numbers we don't know yet what they will produce. So that's a little bit of an unknown at this point. But if you just restricted it to the people already working under irrigation efficiency, probably the 25% will receive at least a 10% savings. And there's a prayer in that by me.
Okay.
Thank you. As I said, I only know what stuff I'm given before the meeting.
So
Let's unless other members have questions, let's continue with your conclusions and the like.
yes.
And then we'll get some comments.
And to
And,
sort of re-emphasize Dr. Kelly's comment, hopefully this slide emphasizes those points you just made, which is the exact amount of groundwater pump reduced by adjusting the values is unknown. But we do believe with more efficient irrigation farming practices, you're going to conserve water. So it's a conservation measure if the practices are employed throughout the agency. So as I mentioned, only a portion of the operators file under irrigation efficiency currently. Many do not, and those are the historical filers. So if you bring them all under that tent, that's where we see the second bullet coming into play. So the third bullet is that a 25% adjustment to these values we believe is a reasonable first step in achieving these water savings, and thus a corresponding reduction in groundwater extractions. So the proposal that you see in Emergency Ordinance E is that all agricultural operators, effective August 1st, 2014, have their extraction allocations, regardless of type, be replaced by the annual efficiency allocation. And we've included the exhibits to show both the current table with the values as well as what a 25% adjustment to those values would be. And that's represented in what I said in the second bullet here, which is we propose that they be adjusted by 20% from the values that was set forth in your board's resolution, previous resolution. Furthermore, On February 1st, 2015, the board may, by resolution, undertake additional adjustments to the annual IAs used to determine the index, that's what IAI stands for, or other pumping restrictions to achieve a cumulative 10% reduction in pumping. And following that, August 1st, 2015, the board may undertake an additional adjustment to achieve the 20%. We do have a variance process. There is one change. This came in, I would say, within the last 2 hours. But what we propose here is that "and" be replaced with "or" under the variance process. So 2 "ors" replacing the "ands." Other than that, there's no change proposed in the variance process.
Can we just pause on that for a second
Sure.
so people understand? I mean, basically, would not have made any sense. No one could meet a restriction. I mean, no one could have met this if they had to do all 3 of these, and that's by having the "and." By changing it to "or," you just have to meet one of these circumstances. That was the intent when it was written, and
Yes.
inadvertently the "and" got added in there.
Thank you for that
What I
clarification.
believe is correct, right? So that people understand why the change.
Under our appeal process, no changes are proposed from what was previously in the previous version.
Here, they're changing that "and" to "or."
And both of them.
Yeah, both of those "ands" to "or."
So it's changing both of the "ands" to "ors" in the newest version of the...
Yes.
I just want all of us to be talking about the same thing.
It should be Article 2, Section H, I believe.
Okay, and so the 2 "ands" become "ors."
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Under H. Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
No change in, or language change proposed under the appeal process. No change proposed under the conservation credits. Same language. This is just previous language I had used in the slide from the previous meeting. Under our prohibition on new extraction facilities for wells, we have added a sentence, or for any permit in, for instance, Al, that's your language, Kenny, it must be legal, of a pumping program approved by the board. This was included to acknowledge programs the board's already had authorized, and not to hinder those issuance of well permits.
Where?
And no other language changes are proposed.
Is that in here or not in
Yes,
here?
it
Okay.
is.
Okay.
That's,
It's a big paragraph.
yes. It's not in, it was contained in a previous version, so it's not in red line.
Okay,
That's why.
thank you.
Just want to point out this graphic. This is how many well permits we have received. We had 11 at the last time we were before you. Now it's up to 15. We've grouped them by replacement wells or backup wells. So you can see those are separate categories. And most of those are actually up in the Las Posas area. You can see the amount of extraction if those applications are approved. Similarly, graph can just show you over time. Definitely seen an uptick in well permit applications. Moving on to the duration of the emergency ordinance. This has been changed to now reflect this language that remains in effect from the date of adoption, reviewed every 18 months unless superseded or rescinded by action of the board or a finding by the board that the drought or emergency condition no longer exists. That's the proposed language. For the effective date, the article now states that the emergency ordinance will become effective immediately upon adoption by the vote of at least 4 members of the board. Otherwise, it shall become effective on the 31st day after adoption. We had a few findings that were revised basically to reflect some of the forebay conditions. That's the first one, finding C. And the second finding, F, was to reflect the 10-year average for the calendar years 2003 through 2012. We have a number of, a few cleanup changes that we're proposing. Specifically, most of them are under Article 2, Paragraph D. That's reflected in the strikeout document that everybody was provided copies. The board has copies. We also had copies for the audience.
Let's hear what he says.
So some of them are, legal gave me sort of as cleanup. There's one substantive comment. So let me just get to the first one. We've added language under there for the duration of the emergency ordinance. That was to be consistent with the M&I section. We've moved August 1st and substituted effective to reflect the date. Added of the emergency ordinance code after section 56.12. Exhibit 1 and 2 have been combined. We've added this language to address a comment we received regarding the allowance and some of the issues related to certain crops. So I'll just read the language to you. For computing the irrigation allowance, the definition of planted acreage may include designated acreage that grew irrigated crops in the 12 months prior to August 1st, 2014, but have subsequently been followed or are growing a non-irrigated crop.
Where was that added?
That was added under
D.
Article 2, D,
It's the blue.
and it's the blue language that you see.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
We've also added under paragraph G a revised sentence, all extraction in excess of allocation established and adjusted by this emergency ordinance should be subject to extraction surcharges. And we just deleted under paragraph H the word that. So in conclusion, staff believes that emergency ordinance E was developed per your board's direction and feedback to address impacts to the agency groundwater basins due to the drought and to protect the agency's groundwater reserves during this drought. We believe that what's proposed is an adaptive approach and subject to periodic review. As Jeff mentioned earlier, you have reductions for both set of operators. They are on different tracks but arrive at the same destination. With that, we are recommending, after hearing input and feedback from various stakeholders today and consideration of revisions, adoption of emergency ordinance E. And with that, I conclude my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, staff have any questions for Gerhard? All right, what we're going to do here in just a moment is we're going to open up for the public to make comments. Before we do that, Al, can you, I know that we may hear comments, and I'm sure the board needs guidance. There are changes that have just come in. There are changes that have come out since the mailing a few days ago. Can you address that issue of what our authority is to deal with these changes?
Are you referring to the ability to make revisions?
Make revisions and act on them today? That issue. What's our authority, if any?
Right. This is a notice public hearing, which is really the only requirement under the GMA legislation for your board to act to adopt an ordinance. Some people may be familiar with ordinance adoption procedures that are followed by counties and cities, and those are more restrictive. Those agencies are prohibited from adopting an ordinance that is changed in any way other than just making a clerical adjustment to the ordinance. So your board, provided you determine that adequate notice has been given of the substantive nature of this ordinance, have the power to adopt it as current, based on its latest revision. So I don't know if that was the extent of it.
Bottom line, we can adopt this ordinance based on changes that are just being made or even that we might make while we're sitting here.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
Okay, Mike?
Mr. Hubner, if you would, for the handout, everybody in the audience was provided one of these, were they not?
The board was provided the copies of the presentation. We can make,
No, well, all I was going to ask you was, because I thought people could follow. On page 16...
You can go back in the slides if you want.
Yeah, if you would. Gerhard, if you'd go back to the reduction of groundwater extractions ag operators proposal. Okay.
right here.
We've had some disconcerting statements made by some members of the public that these allocation amounts were going to be a moving target immediately. And I think we need to say right there, it's going to be an adjustment with a hearing at a future date. The first future date would be February 1 of 15. But for people in the ag community who are trying to make their budget, both financial and water budget, for their crop planting requirements, we're not changing those numbers until they're studied and presented, and everybody will have a chance to argue over them in February. Is that not true?
That's correct. There'll be an
Okay, so
opportunity through a resolution.
I didn't want a bunch of people coming up and having to speak to that when in fact it was a falsehood that was being spread. Thank you.
If I may, let me even expand on that a little bit. This paragraph, these two paragraphs here, I've gotten feedback where I think people have misunderstood, and others have called me with questions from, the party line. Other people have misunderstood. I think it's the responsibility of the GMA to make sure that we bring our aquifer usage into safe balance, safe yield. And as you can see, over a long period of time, we have not been doing that. And some of that is not result of a drought, it's a result of the way we operate. So our operating criteria is wrong, and we haven't met the goal. So they made reference to two trains leaving the station at the same time. And I think what this ordinance does is it puts two trains on the track, one an M&I train and one an ag train. And it really is important that both trains start at the same time and both trains arrive at the destination at the same time. And the destination is the reduction in pumping to bring our aquifer into safe yield. And the M&I folks are responsible collectively for a certain number. The ag folks are responsible for a certain number. This first cut, I think you addressed it, this first cut is hopefully at worst flat. We think it'll be a downward. We don't know, because one of the pushbacks we've gotten from you folks is that there are growers that have spent significant money and time and energy to do the high-tech cropping pattern and are worried that if we did the flat 10 or 20% across the board, they would be overly punished, while somebody who hasn't done that work doesn't have the same level of pain, if you want. So what this ordinance tries to do in these paragraphs is say we're going to use and push everybody to an irrigation index methodology. We addressed the issue of how you calculate for that if in fact you have to fallow some ground. So we've addressed that, and that language frankly was generated by an individual in this audience, not by the GMA staff, and I think the language is correct. And then we're going to reevaluate it at some point, and we're going to look at where we are collectively as a group. And if during that time frame this methodology of irrigation index is flat or climbs or doesn't start moving us in the downward, we're going to have to make reductions, and that's what the OR says, other pumping restrictions, in order to achieve a cumulative 10% reduction in that next 6-month block time. If you do that, if the M&I folks are doing 10% in the first 6 months, 5 and 5, they arrive at the station with a 20% cutback. Ag is going through a transition period, and they've got to make that time up. So one case, the train starts fast and glides into the station, and the other case, the train starts relatively slow and speeds into the station, but they both get there at the same time. And in answer to your question, the 25% will impact some growers currently in this room, and they know it. This methodology allows for folks that even today and the first of next week have to place significant orders to determine what they're going to grow and how much they're going to grow. So it moves that issue down the road, and it gives us all collectively the ability to adjust at the February 15th and the August 15th to make sure that all trains are eventually going to arrive to the station at the same time. We'll talk about it in detail later, but what's going to make this work, I think, are two things that this board is going to have to do. One, I think we're going to have to authorize an expenditure of significant funds to get Dr. Stiles to come back in and rework this table and make sure that the fluff that he put in it or the fluff is correct so that the table numbers are correct. I think one of the questions we had was, when would we implement that? Obviously, if you put a crop in place based on this current table, to change that in the midstream hurts your operation, but it's maybe something we have to look at the February time frame so that we arrive at the station. Second thing that I would propose is that I've gotten a lot of feedback from individuals about the inability of the irrigation index form, the reporting form, has so many holes in it that you can drive a freight train through it. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that. And so the only way we're going to get that problem solved is we got to get Dr. Stiles to do his table. I would propose to this board at some point we authorize, my vision would be 5 significant growers that understand the system, 2 from the Los Posas area, 3 from the Oxnard Plain, to work with staff to modify this form and make it functional that deals with the cropping pattern changes that the current form doesn't deal with, so that we have a valid way of tracking this process. There are some growers, Edgar I know has done it, and Jurgen and his operation have done it, and I think that there are models out there that we can use, and I think we need to spend the money. My vision would be is we actually compensate those guys some fees for going to those meetings, and because it's going to take a significant amount of work and time out of their schedule, and they ought to be compensated for it. But we can deal with that later. And then the third item that I think we have to do, actually 4 items, the third item I think we have to do is we have to improve the reporting input methodology to make it simple. With this amount of paperwork coming in, we need to spend the monies to revamp our computer online system so that growers can in fact do this online, and we can then extract this information relatively quickly without all the data input that we're currently doing now. We have a computer system, but it's not totally operational the way it will reflect if we change the form. And the last issue is, and this is where I think we as a community need to come to grips with the fact that this system is dependent upon voluntary reporting. The truth of the matter is that we all know that we can game the system. And gaming the system is going to ultimately hurt all of us. Because if in fact we have to hit a target of a reduction to sustain this operation in this county, if you're a grower and you game the system, and there are all kinds of ways to game the system, even with the things that I've outlined in terms of Dr. Stiles, the reporting form, and the computer form, what will happen is the numbers that staff will report to this board will be that we haven't even made a dent on hitting safe yield, and therefore we're going to have to make even stronger cuts, and those individuals that have done their duty will take another hit, and that's fundamentally not fair. And how we tackle that issue of not gaming the system is an issue I think this board is going to have to address. And how we do that, I don't know. But and it may be something that Farm Bureau may have to sit down and come up with a methodology that you guys would then present to the board. But if we don't get that kind of input at a certain date, we're going to have to take action, and no one likes it when we take action. So if we fix Dr. Stiles' index, if we fix the form where we report, we fix the methodology in which that information is transmitted to the GMA, and we plug some holes that prevent gaming, and we accomplish what we accomplish, I think we can all pass on to our kids and our next generation a great gift. If we don't do that, they're going to be saddled with the same problem, and I think we got to tackle it. So these two paragraphs here are very important paragraphs, and they're written relatively broad to indicate to folks that we have some flexibility. And I don't know where we're going to go when we get to those paragraphs, but it gives us that flexibility.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to also address for the group, and especially the other board members who weren't part of trying to figure the ag side out. The reason to add the clarity on fallowed land, staff had agreed and was planning on allowing that, but it wasn't in the document. And the comment was, okay, well, they could ignore it or whatever. The purpose of fallowing some land is that let a grower actually make a crop on the amount of property that he irrigates, which will actually produce a crop. It's of no value to raise a field of some crop that produces no seed or food. That's the ultimate goal of Ventura County, especially, is to produce something that people can eat. And so if a grower can set aside a certain amount of land and concentrate his resources on the land he has, then he can produce a crop without having to go beyond his allocation and therefore sustain a penalty. Because I think getting penalty water and getting the penalties for it does not help the aquifer. It might help the holdings of this agency, but that's not the purpose of the agency. The purpose of the agency is ultimately to save some water. And so the fallowing the land provision enables a grower to set aside some property and not farm it, concentrate his resources where he can get his best return, and we in turn will get a better end product. And so I hope everybody appreciates and supports that. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Before we go into the public testimony, I was wondering if I could ask Mr. Pratt, in the interest of full disclosure so everybody sort of understands the significant change made here going to irrigation efficiency, and could you just give some background in terms of the input that you were provided, who provided it, the input that came in that led to staff's recommendation?
Oh yeah, it was. This came from Ag. It was a very good idea from a public policy standpoint. The Ag Association was there, Farm Bureau was there, several very prominent growers, all with different viewpoints. Some of them landowners, some of them people who lease land and grow crops. And it was a significant conversation, and it shifted the historic conversation against sort of this historical allocation basis, first come, first served, to let's share the water based on what we grow. That's sort of a new way of policy thinking. And while it still has its little problems that need to be tweaked, overall the idea was that you force everybody to start tightening their belts, if you will. And there are a number of people in the audience who've already done that and made significant investments, as the chair has said. But as I understand it, as has been relayed to me, there are still many people who haven't and still report on historical allocation. So the feeling of Ag was that if we went this way with the irrigation allowance index, that we probably would see some gains or reductions in pumping, if you will, in this period between now and August, or when we put the reductions in place between August and February, if that date stands, to get to Board Member Craven's. And that would come because the people who had been reporting historically would probably have to tighten their belt, but we had no way of quantifying it. We went back and we looked at the database. We don't ask for enough information from those who report historically to be able to really analyze what that would be. There were going to be people affected that were reporting efficiently already, because some of these numbers are tighter than others. So we expect reductions, but we just don't know how big they are. They'll be quantified and chased. So the public policy has shifted a little bit. I hope I'm answering the right question. And from sort of this historical allocation perspective to let's share the resource with the growers. A significant concern that's come up is that if over time everybody were to change to more
water-intense crops, that this in itself wouldn't be sustainable. But in discussing that with that group, their sense of it was that that wasn't likely to happen overnight, and that adjustments could be made along the way if we saw that pattern sort of expressing itself. So board members Kelly and Borcher were there, and if I've missed anything, I'd invite them to kind of fill in. But that was my take on the.
So just two things. So certainly, if everybody went to water-intensive crops, this by itself would not reduce. In fact, as it could lead to increased groundwater pumping.
That's right.
So but in the short run, it certainly is a reasonable start to try to move towards efficiency. Could you just very briefly just summarize? So did that, from your perspective, did that feel like a good, healthy public process in terms of input, give and take between staff and
oh, absolutely. It's we learned it. We staff learned a ton. We're not out there practicing. We learned from the practitioners, and I dare say they learned a little bit about public policy and the making of public policy in the process. But it was a very good process from my perspective.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Bennett, I would like to take this opportunity to staff exec officer, Jeff. He was most positive and cooperative and leading it to try to come to a reasonable endpoint. And so I think that he should be commended for having provided a very positive environment for everybody to make their discussions. No one was excluded from saying their piece.
And the two of you for taking the time to go to those meetings. Good for you.
Yeah. We would have liked to have Chairman Malhart there too, but you see there's a Brown problem there, you know. So.
They don't want me there, trust me.
But anyway, I just hope that we moved it along far enough that people can get their budgets out, because that was the big cry, was that this is going to hit everybody, and we needed to have some speed. There's been some kickback on the speed with which we went, but it was an intense forward movement. Thank you.
Let me add just another quick thing in the hopes of making things efficient for later today. But I've heard a few times, and you said it today, Chairman Malhart, that there was some fluff or some fat in those irrigation allocation numbers. And I just want to let the public know that the reason for that was that it was intentional. It was designed as part of the program because it included a factor for salt leaching and for east winds and for frost protection. And so these numbers were intentionally, if you want to call them fat, and so that was one of the points I had there. I just want to make sure it was out there, that there'd be no misunderstanding that somehow the agency developed a program that was intentionally favorable to ag in some way. There was a reason for it. And secondly, thank you to Mr. Pratt for making clear that concept of the historical versus efficiency filers. We see that efficiency filers they're less than 25% of all the filers in the agency. And so I think, in fact, or I suspect, we don't know the answer, but there will be some real reduced pumping when everybody is brought in under this IAI program and required to use the same numbers. And then just lastly, a kind of a warning or a notice for everybody, particularly ag is brought under this specter of many times of the potential of cheating or gaming the system. If that does occur, it's going to become apparent really quickly in the reporting numbers that are filed and what we see. And I just want to let everybody know that if that does occur, this becomes a different agency. It becomes a bigger agency, and it becomes a more agency with it's going to have to take bigger steps towards enforcement. We're probably going to see things like automatic metering that I've fought vigorously to kind of keep down, because I've always believed that our agricultural industry was cooperative and believed in the cause of having a sustainable resource. And so I just encourage everybody to continue with that cooperative mentality and that idea of we don't need a bigger agency to police this thing. We can do this ourselves, but we do all have to cooperate and be part of the system.
Charlotte?
I have some more questions along a different line. One of my questions as I read through this is we're talking about M&I and ag, and in the back of my mind somewhere was a discussion one time or another about people who had to certify that certain wells were for domestic use. Are those people included under here? Are they considered ag?
They're not. They represent a de minimis. The ones who are just filing on domestic are about 230 acre feet of the total 120,000 we're talking about. So in that sense, they're not.
So they're not. But I think we still need to tell them they need to cut back. How does this or will this apply to special projects such as the Conejo Creek project that we talked about at the last meeting and adopted a resolution on, and Camarillo's project, the desalter project?
It won't. If your board makes special exceptions, I think it's clear, or we tried to make it clear in the ordinance that it wouldn't apply to those situations.
In fact, that question about the well, the inclusion of the well, was specifically to address the Camarosa issue, that they have an additional well that they need to put in.
Okay, I just wanted to get that out and on the record. And then one other thing, in the ordinance I got today, that the date for ag was changed, and that was explained very well, and it's a financial thing. And I'm making this statement with the understanding that the sooner we start cutting back, the more water we'll save. But municipalities are also have a financial problem, and that is related to Prop 218. It takes about 3 months to get a water rate increase approved. So most of us increased our water rates in January. That process started last year for Camarillo in May. It continued through September when we had calculated how much we needed to increase our rates. We had it sent out to the people in, I believe, September, and we were just barely meeting the deadline to raise our rates July 1st. So I'm wondering if any consideration was given or any discussion was given when the ag people were moved back from July 1st to August 1st in today's version, if it was discussed with people or if the cities had brought up the quandary because of the timing of 218.
This is the first I'm hearing about it.
I have not heard that concern raised. It was not raised directly with me.
I guess we'll find out if they're concerned at all. And those are the only questions I had.
Director Craven, the change to August 1 from July was to try to more coincide with the typical fall start of many of the crops.
But it's a financial thing.
Yeah, but there was no more ulterior motive than that.
Oh, I didn't imply that. I was just wondering if anybody talked about moving the whole thing back to August 1st.
Well, some time ago I pled the case of trying to move our reporting year to match Department of Water Resources, because then that would have an anniversary, of October, because the wet year in November, December is the same wet year in February, March. And the dry year in November is the same dry year that continues into March. But we've not gotten that far yet either. But the August thing was to accommodate the start time for most crops, or many crops.
Let me speak also to that August date. There are a number of growers that, and I know the group had talked about, and that's why it's in here, the August start time. We've heard from a number of growers that the July 1 works well for them. We have a grower that's raised the issue of what do you do with that July time frame. Jeff will speak to that in a second. And we've gotten a letter from Edgar sent us a letter saying, why doesn't United move to the same August time frame? And I'll paraphrase what Mike would say, and it's by statute that we have to do it in the January time frame. So from a reporting standpoint, all of you are going to have to deal with this issue in July. All of you are going to have to deal with this issue in August. And I'm hearing from tree crop growers that the July dates work fine. It's the way we've been doing business for 26 years. And It may be that although there is a large crop that would shift in the August timeframe, the bigger group has to all deal with this in the July timeframe, and at United, it's statute driven by our state powers or whatever. So the water code, the water code drives those dates. So as we hear comments from the public today, I need you guys and others in the audience to put their thinking cap on, because if it means we need to actually put it back to the July date, not to solve the city's problem, because the city has its own problems, but in terms of the manpower and paperwork and all the other stuff, if you're in United's area, July is not going to change. If you're in the GMA's area, we're shifting it for a subgroup of all our crops, and it may be that the shift should be on that cropping pattern, given the fact of the other things I just said.
The only problem was that group have a more difficult task because they're the group that are dealing with maybe 4 crops a year on the same piece of land and stuff, and that whole thing is a much bigger, where if you've got 100 acres of lemons, that's just one report.
Okay. I just want to let everybody know, because Edgar had written us a letter to that effect, and here's the answer. Can't be done. Can you talk about that window, that July window, because that issue was raised yesterday at the United Board meeting, how you would handle that?
In other words, if we do switch to August, there's a month that might drop off. I'll let Rick speak to that. He's the one who handles the reports.
Well, based on what we've looked at so far, it might be best just to add another month onto the reporting period for ag. So they would report, instead of January 1 through the end of June, they'd report January 1 through the end of July, and we would just roll up those numbers under what would essentially be a short year efficiency filing for those ag operators that are already filing under efficiency. Just button that up and then start fresh August 1st and move forward.
Okay, so what you're saying is, if there's a mechanical way, we'll figure it out so that we'll get those numbers and it'll be somehow prorated and all that kind of stuff.
We could look at that.
Yeah, so there's ways to do it. Okay, what I'm going to do at this time, Gerhard, thank you. What I'm going to do at this time is I'm going to open up for public comment, and again, I remind you that there's a whole bunch of folks in here that may want to speak, so let's monitor our time. And who would like to speak first? Rob.
Rob Royer, the Ventura County Ag Association. Mr. Chairman, board members, staff members. First of all, I'd like to thank the board and particularly members Kelly and Borchard for all the work they've been doing over the last few weeks. Staff members, Jeff has been outstanding with Rick and Gerhardt. We've met with them for the last 3 Fridays for a total of about 11 hours over that period of time, in addition to all the other outside time that we've been doing. And kudos to Director Kelly for implementing this IAI index. It's already listed in your agency code. You guys paid $140,000 for it years ago, and Dr. Stiles created really the most scientific and objectively quantifiable allocation of water to the various crops in normal conditions, wet conditions, and dry conditions. So really, looking at this particular exhibit that's attached to the ordinance, we think is really the best approach. We had many meetings at the Farm Bureau office with many representatives of the ag industry. Edgar Terry was fronting for a lot of the strawberry growers and the vegetable row crop growers. Jurgen brought in a lot of great comments. We had basically every crop group represented at these meetings. Had a lot of good comments, a lot of contention. We looked at, obviously many strategies to approaching this particular problem. Taking a flat 20% across the board and how that might impact some growers. We looked at dividing the safe yield by the number of irrigated acres and came up with about 1.3 acre feet per acre, which wasn't going to do people much good. We were concerned about the people that are already part of this conservation effort, and like John Grether, who had testified, and how some of these other type of strategies might adversely affect him. So the index allowance, we think, is the best approach to this particular problem. We also appreciate your movement on the duration. We felt that the 3 terms that you had in the previous ordinance were just not achievable, so we appreciate your acceptance of our suggested language on that. And in agreement with your comments, I mean, we need good publication of this to the agricultural community. We need a public educational type meeting where people can come and really understand the fundamentals of this particular ordinance. We need a reformed or revised reporting sheet that is going to give us some better information on which to make more informed decisions in the future. And from a public policy standpoint, we understand that this is something that had to be done. And agriculture has stepped up to the plate. We've come a long way from your initial proposed ordinance to where we are today. We appreciate the opportunity to have been part of that process, and we hope that you will enact it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Who would like to speak next? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name's Peter Goldenring, and I'm actually representing a third train. We've talked today about M&I and agriculture, and I want to initially make clear that the purpose of my comments are not to disagree with the need for reducing the demand. But there are actually 3 trains. There's agriculture, which is very important. There's the cities, municipalities, but there's also industrial. And my clients are Grimes Rock and State Ready Mix and R&R Recycling. And we get the water from wells. And I have reached out to Jeff and Rick to see if there's anyone else on the train with my clients in the county. And other than perhaps some golf courses or some wells that might be designated industrial but not being used, and perhaps other than Wayne J., which is another mine, they've not been able to think of any. I've not been able to think of any. That's not to say there aren't others, but we are actually a third train. And the difficulty that we're having and what we're concerned about is that the methodology of approaching industrial, which are my clients, actually are counter-effective in terms of what has transpired. And let me explain to you. In regard to the historic use of water, let's just focus on the mine for a moment. Unlike a crop field that would be fallow, but unlike an orchard where there's always going to be a requirement for water to keep the trees alive, irrespective of whether the economic condition is good or not good, the fruit may or may not make a profit or not. In my client's world, for example, just focusing on the mine, if the economy is down, the rock and sand sit. There is no use of water. And so the base usage over looking at a 10-year period is not capturing the effect, or it's causing my clients to suffer the consequence of a low, cyclically low economy around amount of water. The second is, with agriculture conceptually, and I'm no ag expert, but conceptually what I'm hearing is we have certain crops, they require a certain amount of water. We're going to look at what that amount of water is now, and we're going to force down efficiency. And it's going to now capture not just the people who have been efficient, but the people who haven't, the people who have chosen to let the garden hose run. And so the people who have spent the money on an efficiency basis, they don't have to re-spend it. They've already captured that efficiency. They may have to spend more because of the further reductions, but it's going to capture that universe of people that haven't paid attention to what you folks have been saying for 15 or 20 years. my client's been paying attention. I have a client with a mine that uses far less than what would otherwise be used in a mine of its size historically. They have recycling and recapturing of water, well over $1 million worth of processes. They have dewatering systems that they've spent $750,000 on, so that after the sand and gravel are washed, the water's, in a non-technical sense, squeezed out and put back into recycling. So over the 10 years, my client has created that efficiency and been what you want, a good water steward. But when you say to my client, we're going to look at 10 years and now push you down, that essentially punishes them for the good water stewardship that they've experienced and have enacted over the 10 years. And the last is that in the world of industry, there are changes that take place over time. And I'll put two on the table to you that are essentially punished or not captured in this concept of how industrial is lumped with municipal and not treated conceptually the same as ag. For my client at State Ready Mix, they processed over an extensive period of time a recycling facility that Jeff's staff uses all the time. It's one of the few in the Ventura West area where the rock, the curbs, the gutters, all of that gets recycled. That was approved in 2010 and came online in 2012. And the county, when it imposed conditions around that, of course, required water and the like.
Mr. Goldman,
Yes, sir.
for the sake of time, let me interrupt you for just a second. I think you bring up a number of issues, and I'm looking at Article 2, Paragraph H. And if you look at Article 2, Paragraph H, it says the executive officer may, on a written request from a landowner or operator, grant a variance from the requirements of this article based on a showing, 1, and then an or, 2, then an or, and finally 3. And I think there's enough area in there that I think you need to go down that road to make your case at that appropriate time for the kind of variance that you're talking about.
If I might, Chairman Mulhart, I understand that, and I listened with the words "and" changed to "or," and I recognize that change in the implication around the variance issue, and I appreciate that. I would only comment that from a statutory perspective, what I think is I'm trying not to use the word better, but a better legislative model would be to take industrial out of the municipal, make a separate industrial, and come back in 30 days with that.
Okay. Given by staff, your comments that staff said and you said, this is a very small, finite group of entities. And I do believe that if in one of those sentences, there's enough wiggle room for you to make your case, for the board to determine if in fact that case applies. There are special circumstances or exceptional characteristics of owner or operator who do not apply generally to the comparable owners and operators in the same vicinity. You've made that case. That's been part of your argument. The strict application of the reductions as they apply to the owner or operator will result in practical difficulties or unnecessary hardships inconsistent with the general purpose of the emergency ordinance. You're trying to make that case. So what I'm telling you now, sir, is that I think that I would not recommend today doing this legislative change that you propose of crossing out this entity, because I don't think that we've had a chance to look at the claims and the things that you talk about and have a rational analysis by staff. What I'm submitting to you, sir, is that there is in paragraph H enough ability. It was one of the issues that was raised when we first had this first meeting way back when Shauna from the city of Ventura recommended that we ought to have some kind of exemption policy or appeal policy, and that's what that paragraph addresses. So rather than going on about trying to make the case to put in the language you want today, my recommendation is there is language in right now that if we adopt the ordinance now, and I'm not saying we are, I'm just saying if we do adopt the ordinance now, that language in there gives you the flexibility to make the case and come back before the staff and the board.
Well, and I, again, as I said, when you started talking, my initial concern was with the words "and" conjunctive. It's now
Okay,
disjunctive, so I appreciate that. But again, I think from a larger public policy perspective, the lumping now and the lumping in the future of municipality and industrial is a disconnect. There's 3 trains, and the more appropriate mechanism would be to carve out industrial, at least in my view, and I understand yours, and come back in 30 or 45 days after staff has been able to answer the question, am I a standalone?
I don't see us doing that.
Well, that's your call, but the
Chairman
record,
Muller,
of course, reflects my comments.
I would like to point out, we have another process that'll be coming up that is identified. It's on the agenda. It's a 7-month process for us to be able to have more time to not do everything that long-term planning would be, but to take sort of another step in that direction, and so perhaps there's another carve out at that point in time. But I do think it's probably just appropriate to go on record as saying, at least from my perspective, that it says or unnecessary hardships inconsistent with the general purposes of this emergency ordinance. The general purpose of this emergency ordinance is not to put small industrial operators out of business or create undue, and I think it's fair to say that right now. That's not the purpose of this ordinance. And I think we have language in there that therefore allows an appropriate appeal process, as Chairman Mulhart has identified. So.
But we got to go through that process.
I don't know if you looked at, and perhaps Rick or Tony Morgan can help you or whatever, but your rinse-ate actually re-perks right in the area. I mean, that's why you have a gravel pit, or your workstation where state is right at the perk area, and your mine is where an outcrop is. That's why your mine is there.
Correct.
So at least I know it's outside GMA, but Gillibrand's pit, which you didn't recognize, they're almost in a bowl, and they just recycle their water. And I'm wondering if there isn't some of that any of the rinse-ate that gets passed is being recycled already.
All right, hold on. The purpose of this meeting is to make a decision whether we enact emergency ordinance E. Mr. Goldring has said he has concerns about a special circumstances. He knows now we've changed the word to or. There are enough paragraphs in which you can come back before the board to make your case. I don't want to debate whether your case is correct or not now. Your suggestion was to include a carve-out. I would not support that. I will support the fact that we have a variance methodology. We need to put that variance methodology to work, and you may be the first one up, and we'll run that one up and down the flagpole and see what we got. Okay?
Well, I don't want to be that, and I'll be done now with this. I would only comment that in terms of making this ordinance have legs against any possible attack from anyone, and I'm not suggesting it would come from me. It needs to be on data, and it needs to be rationally based. And enacting an ordinance with the record being that industrial is different than the other two, and there hasn't been any analysis around how to treat it, creates the potential infirmity. How you choose to do that is yours.
Yes.
I think it would be really good if we could listen to all the comments, and then instead of making a decision on each one as they come along, then maybe having our discussion at the end.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
Chairman Mulhart, members of the board, I'm Carol Schoen. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the Las Posas Basin Users Group. The Las Posas Basin Users Group met 2 days ago to review Emergency Ordinance E. We understand and appreciate the responsibility your board bears in managing the groundwater basins within the GMA. The Las Posas Basin Users Group is committed to completing a basin-specific management plan for the West, East, and South Las Posas basins. We take your board's trust in delegating the creation of this management plan very seriously. The group is committed to focus and dedicate the time necessary to produce the basin-specific management tool. It is our desire to present this plan to your board as soon as it is possible. In preparing for the presentation of this plan to your board, our group felt it would be beneficial to use a third party for technical review of the plan. This would be in addition to the professional technicians currently involved with the process in LPUG and the GMA staff side. The Las Posas Users Group understands the direction your board has taken following the request of Governor Brown to reduce water use. The water conditions in Ventura County, and especially for those dependent on the Santa Clara River, are in a critical state. The Las Posas Users Group knows that your board will adopt an emergency ordinance, and we would like to express the following comments. And in going through these comments, I'm going to skip over all the ones that have been fixed in 2 days because a lot has been done. So the first one, we thank you very much for listening to agriculture's request and changing over to an irrigation allowance index. I think that that will allow fairness in administering the cutbacks and hopefully won't overly disadvantage those operations that have already done their investment in sophisticated irrigation systems. As far as fallowing, we certainly had a lot of comments on that, and that's been addressed, and we thank you. I'll skip that. Very confused over how we would report on an August date, but I think the suggestion that Rick has come up with is the best one, that we go from January through July, do our irrigation efficiency reportings on the old method, and then start August through December and have a short. I mean, I don't know how else we do that, and I'm happy to help work with the forums.
Okay, good.
Happy to help. For M&I's side, we had a discussion, and I'm sure Mr. Pacala will come up and talk about District 1 and District 19. But his explanation to our group that District 1 and District 19 are impacted by using this 10-year time frame for the temporary extraction allocation, because during this time there was an in-lieu program. And that in-lieu program brought in imported water and reduced pumping in the Las Posas basins. It was to an advantage of all of us. What we would ask is that in reviewing how those cutbacks will be for District 1 and 19, that they don't exceed the 20% that you're looking for. This method of averaging could cause a huge 50 to 60% cutback according to Reddy's calculations at our meeting. And our concern...
Could I ask, not more than 20% of last year's, or of what?
The same criteria that you're looking for, and maybe what we do is include, and maybe there's certainly a suggestion from District 1 and District 19 how that would be done, but maybe we include the in lieu with the pumping that went on so that we get an average of what the use was. And what we're looking to do is reduce the use, not necessarily just look at the actual extraction. I think that will be fair.
I understand what you're saying.
What happens is that as those District 19 rates skyrocket because of having to pay for more and more imported water, those agricultural users, which there are many, are moving over to their own wells, or they're changing their pumping back to the mutual water companies. Now, if you don't change the allocation on the District 19 side, but you increase the pumping on, independent wells or other users, then, you've got an increase of use. that's our concern here. We want to make sure that there's fairness in District 1 and District 19. On to the comment that we were also appreciate the change in the definition of the duration of the ordinance, that we have eliminated the sea level measurement for the time being. And looking to the future, the long-range goals of the Basin-Specific Management Plan will address the use of brackish groundwater, and our Basin-Specific Management Plan will address the differences between the Las Posas basins and the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley basins. And I thank you for considering our comments, and also thanks for working so closely between staff and the ag group to kind of fix everything that we had concerns about a couple of days ago. So.
Okay, thank you. Ready?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, good afternoon. Reddy Pakala with Water and Sanitation Department of the Public Works Agency. This afternoon, I'm representing Ventura County Water Works District number 1 and 19. I want to thank Carol for bringing the issue about District 1, District 19, what would happen with the temporary extraction allocations. Yesterday afternoon, District 1 Advisory Committee members met, and I have presented the emergency ordinance the way it was drafted yesterday, not today, not with the changes that were made today. And we have had a lot of discussion. Of course, our advisory committees are very concerned about the impacts of the rates to our ratepayers, like most of the other M&I purveyors. So what we are recommending is that if your board would like to consider changing the temporary extraction allocation from 10-year averaging to 5-year averaging, you don't even have to go through any of the variances or exceptions for M&I. And the other purveyor who was there, Camarillo, they said it didn't matter to them whether it's 5 years or 10 years. If we were to do that, we would not. If your board were to approve the 10-year TEA extractions, what that would mean for District 1 is we have to reduce our usage by 51%, 52%, and District 19 has to reduce by 61%. That will be a big burden on our...
From current usage?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So based on feedback from our advisory committees, I did send you a letter. I hope you have a copy of the letter in your files. I do want to acknowledge Mr. Andy Waters and David Schwabar. Both of them are on our District 1 Advisory Committee, and Mr. Sam McIntyre in the District 19 Advisory Committee. City representatives from City of Moore Park were also there at that meeting, and City Mayor also sent you a letter supporting our recommendation regarding this particular issue. I also want to bring up the issue of efficiency allocations for District 1, District 19 agricultural users. As you may be aware, District 1, District 19 provides agricultural services for more than 450 property owners within our district service areas. Previously, we have requested executive officer to approve use of efficiency allocations for our agriculture customers for only that portion of the water that we are serving from local groundwater, not for the water that we are importing from Callegas. The executive officer did approve our request for use of efficiency allocations. However, we were not able to implement until last year when our board of supervisors have adopted a new tiered rate structure for agriculture. We have now two-tiered rate structure, Tier 1, Tier 2, for agricultural rates. Tier 1 is based on the water supply from the local groundwater wells. If somebody exceeds that allocation, then they would pay the imported water costs. That's the way we have restructured our agricultural rates. With that new structure we have in place, what we are requesting your board is if your board would confirm approval of the efficiency allocations for District 1 and District 19, and also authorize us to use the irrigation allowance index values as shown in your table 2, I guess, or the exhibit 2. and we can provide the needed documentation just for the agricultural customers so that they get the same type of allocation like other agricultural customers that you are going to be treating other agricultural customers. And we're also recommending, if you allow us to use that methodology beginning this calendar year, we will greatly appreciate that. The last comment I have is this is to respond to Director Craven about what would be the appropriate time line for the M&I purveyors to take the recommended reductions. All of the purveyors who are within the Cayuga service area, for the last 4 or 5 years, we have worked with the Metropolitan Water District and Cayuga's Water District. What Metropolitan and Cayuga's have come up is their water rates increase only on January 1st of each year. So that has been working well for us to deal with the Proposition 218 requirements Dr. Craven talked about. Usually takes us about 4 to 6 months of time from the time we know what the imported water rates are to go to our Board of Supervisors and get the needed approvals and meeting the requirements of Prop 218. What my suggestion, I was thinking as Director Craven was talking, if your board were to consider to make M&I reductions effective January 1st, 2015, that make it 20% instead of making 10 and 15. If you make it 20% effective January 1st, that will coincide with what we get from imported water sources. We can put all those together when we go to our ratepayers and our board advisory committees with our rate analysis. We think that may work better for M&I. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Let me ask just a quick summary question. You're suggesting that M&I across the board uses a 5-year average and not a 10-year average. Okay. Authorizing, and I tried to write it down ready as you said it, and you, my old fingers write pretty slowly, so I may have said this wrong. There are ag users in District 1 and District 19. You wanted us to authorize the use of the irrigation, the IAI for the ag customers.
Correct.
Okay. And then finally, it's an issue of the 218 that Charlotte raised. And because of the way rate structures are set for M&I folks beginning the first of the year, that that gives you time to look at what those rates will be, go through the Board of Supervisors, do the 218 process, and that means that your first big cutback will become at the 15 instead of and January 15th or in that time frame. You'd go straight to a 20% cutback, and you'd roll into the end of the station at a 5% cutback, or
that's what
you'd go to the full cutback very early. Is what you'd do.
That's what
you think. Do you have the support of the M&I, other M&I purveyors in the audience?
No, I did not talk about the M&I. I just was thinking about when Dr. Craven talked about how would it impact. I'm just speaking for District 119. I represent 4 purveyors within the Cayuga service area.
Okay, all right. So we don't know if other M&I entities would ever agree to that. Okay, so that's one of the problems. Okay. Second of all, as I said earlier, if we enact a ordinance and that doesn't go in effect until August, as it currently stands, the M&I purveyors could in fact utilize Article 2, Paragraph H, that gives us the ability to act on some, all, none of your recommendations. It could possibly include Mr. Goldberg's recommendations as a total package that the M&I folks are responsible for this quantity of water, ag is responsible for this quantity of water. We are committed to getting to that number, but here's a better methodology that works for us, but we're not trying to get the train off the track. We're going to get there, but the way it was spelled out is not working, and we need to have a variance. that methodology in paragraph H would work in this
Yes.
case, wouldn't it?
Yes, it will.
If, assuming that you make the case and the board agrees with it. That's always the caveat.
Yes, yes.
But assuming you do that, and you do that correctly, we should be okay. Jeff, your thoughts on that? I mean, Reddy's asking for some things that I'm not sure that the the M&I community has agreed upon, and you could hold a GMA-based discussion group with the ag purveyors to hammer out some of these, I'm sorry, the M&I purveyors, as we've done for the ag, and that was very successful. We could repeat that model for the M&I.
We certainly could.
So that would be really my suggestion to dealing with these kinds of issues, is utilizing a methodology in there, letting the GMA staff set those meetings up and hammer it through, and if we can get it done before August, great. If not, then we'll have to figure another time.
Mr. Chair, let me just say, if we have everybody in here coming in and saying, we don't want to do anything till January 1st or February 1st because we're special, we're never going to get there.
Well, the only caveat, the only reason I agree with that comment, the only comment that I make is that if the M&I folks want a variance, and they have the ability to make up the shortfall and do it in a bigger chunk, change the speed of the train as the analogy, then if they're willing to get to the end destination at the right time with the right reductions, and it works, what harm have we done? If we use this process as a methodology not to make the reductions and delay the process or confuse the process, then it's not going to get through the board. I think that needs to be clear, and that's essentially what you're saying. So I don't know. I'm questioning if we can make all the level of changes you're asking for, given the fact the other M&I individuals have not commented on it.
And understand that this was in response to something I said, and the boards haven't even discussed this type of thing. A 20% increase next January is a heck of an increase.
Yeah.
The 5-year averaging, too, I know at least one entity that will disadvantage them much worse. So the shoe doesn't always fit on the right foot.
So,
Well, with the changes you made in the variance, one of my concern was we had to comply with those 3 conditions for a variance. That was one of my biggest concern when I read that. With the changes and/or, I think we can come to the executive officer and request those variations.
okay, then, all right, yes.
If I could, I'm just in addressing sort of the discussion here. If/when we adopt an ordinance and it has this variance in here, they could be coming for a variance and asking for the exact same thing, which is a delay till a certain period of time, et cetera. So, this request, could happen through the variance process. What I think I'm hearing Director Mulhart or Chairman Mulhart referring to is, instead of everybody doing a variance, perhaps there's a whole modification that M&I works out with staff in a process similar to what Ag did. That just makes common sense. But we adopt the ordinance, and if it doesn't make common sense, or they don't get to work, they don't get it done, this is what's going to happen. So from that standpoint, I think it's consistent with what we're trying to do, which is we adopt something, and that is additional motivation for M&I to get to the table and to work out sort of those agreements. So I think both things can be achieved. We can still stay on the schedule. My question that I would just like to ask is, from a preliminary take, does staff have an opinion about going to 5 years for M&I? Does that not get us enough? Is it 5 years?
No, 5 years is fine. What I could do, I don't want to take your time, but the reason we prepared that table was anticipation of this comment. 5 years, just the short answer is 5 years, fine. And I think it's already dealt with, but we can make it formal. And that we already allowed efficiency reporting for ag customers. We're treating ag the same, no matter if they're getting some of their water from an M&I provider or if they're getting some of their water from a mutual.
So in the interest of trying to address some of these things as they come up here in the conversation, it sounds like there is a variance process. It could be that they just ask in the variance process for clarification, or it could be that the process works with M&I having a meeting similar to the Ag Committee, having their meetings, and we literally make a modification after we go forward. But if neither of those go forward and we've adopted this, then the feet are held to the ground. The other question I have for you is, you talk about rate increases. We're more interested in groundwater pumping reduction. Just like Director Kelly said, we're not trying to enrich the agency by having lots of surcharges. How confident do you feel that you can reduce groundwater pumping by 20% with your rate increases? Is that, are there other things you're going to have to do to get municipal groundwater pumping, which is a little bit different than municipal use, down by 20%? Do you feel confident that you guys can actually reduce pumping, or is it just that you will pay the surcharge and people will just...
No, we will not be paying surcharge. We'll be buying imported water to offset the reductions in pumping.
Okay.
And that's where the expense comes from.
And that groundwater will be extracted from the East Las Posas. Is no northern water coming.
Well,
Your Honor, let me just say one other thing. The reason that the municipalities would raise their rates is not to increase the amount of money coming in. The reason they would raise their rates is to make people realize that if they use more water or continue to use the same amount of water, they will pay more, and that is the incentive for people to reduce their consumption. It worked very well in the 90s, and it's only been in the last 2 or 3 years that Camarillo's water, even though we've increased population, our water consumption, total pumped water and imported water, has just now reached back to where we were in the late 80s and early 90s.
Okay. Ready? I think the short answer is the variance process. You're going to have to figure out how to use that. Okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yes, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Jason Weiner on behalf of Wichtoyo Foundation and its Water Initiative. It's real good to be here before you today, and it's nice to see the direction that the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency is attempting to move towards. We do agree that it's a responsibility of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency to bring the aquifers into the safe field, and the result of the aquifers being in the condition they are in is not because of the drought, but because of the historic management practices by the agency. And we don't want to see this agency fail. We want it to achieve its purpose, and for 2 reasons. One is to preserve the existing municipal and agricultural activity and land use in the region. But 2, we also represent a little bit of a different constituency than maybe you're used to seeing here before your agency. The Santa Clara River and the public trust protected resources of all the communities up and down the river are dependent upon a healthy in-stream flow regime. And the way that Fox Canyon groundwater management aquifer is managed has direct impacts on the condition of that river and all of its beneficial uses for the communities that extend beyond just agriculture and municipal use. So having said that, what we'd like to do today is comment on the ordinance before your agency, but comment on the municipal clauses and agricultural clauses, and then also provide a brief comment on long-term planning and how that relates to this ordinance. So to start off with municipal and industrial extractions, we do support the TEA extraction provisions in the interim. But in the long run, what we'd like to see is a comprehensive study effort being undertaken maybe by this agency or at the lead of this agency to determine what the best available technology can reasonably achieve for municipal conservation, municipal reclamation, and efficiency. And what we'd like to see is a reopener in this ordinance to then to implement those reasonably achievable extractions and to enforce those extractions at the municipal level, maybe over time. But without such a study and without efficiency at the municipal level especially, it's going to be very, very, very hard to bring this aquifer into safe field, and we feel it's a responsibility of this agency to get us there. And in regards to agriculture, so the last meeting, March 14th meeting, we heard from a number of growers that were implementing best available efficiency technology on farm. We heard from I believe, Jürgen, who said that because he implemented computer technology that controlled the irrigation on his raspberry fields, that he was able to reach 2.5 acre-feet per year per acre for raspberry operations. And we heard from, I believe it was Trether growers, and my apologies for if I didn't correctly pronounce his name, but it seemed to us that he was growing avocado and citrus at 1.06 acre-feet per year per acre, and one of his family members in different type of soil conditions was achieving citrus and avocado at 1.3 to 1.4 acre-feet per year, that is. So to us, to see the annual irrigation allowance be reduced by 25%, but to see those figures not nearly approach what best available practices are achieving, we feel it's a bit irresponsible. And we don't feel that the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency is meeting its objectives and its obligations to the public by imposing these more lenient rates. Granted, 25% irrigation reduction is a good goal, but it only really is reducing usage by 10%, and Governor Brown just called on a 20% reduction. But to reach the safe field in the long run, we need strong measures now, and it can be done over time. But when the data is available, and I think a study for crops that don't have the best available technology for efficiency practices available, a study would be a good measure to determine what that figure should be. But for citrus and row crops and for raspberries, we don't see any reason. We would see it would be arbitrary and capricious for this board to adopt these illusory standards when growers over time can achieve the rates that are being achieved, for instance, by Jürgen's farms for raspberries and the Drether farms for citrus and avocado. So, and again, if that data is not available that shows what is the best available economically achievable efficiency, on-farm efficiency practices are achieving per crop, we do support this interim 25% across the board reduction. It's better than nothing, but we want to see a clear plan towards this agency adopting that best available technology standard and feel it's necessary and your responsibility. I think another measure that our foundation feels strongly about is, supporting very strict penalties for exceeding the annual irrigation allowance figures. So strict enough penalties to disincentivize over-extraction. Without the severe enough penalties in place to disincentivize over-extraction, we feel that this emergency ordinance has the potential to not really achieve its purpose. And that would be, again, for municipal, and that would apply also for municipal and agricultural operations. In the long term, what we really would like to see and would like to work with this agency and the public and growers and municipalities alike in achieving is, first, we really need to determine the safe yield for the Oxnard Plain Aquifer. We need to determine a concrete scientific number that gives us something to work from, but it also needs to incorporate, that safe yield needs to incorporate the protections that are needed for the Santa Clara River ecosystem, to sufficiently protect and sufficiently mimic the in-stream flow regime of that river, to protect all the beneficial uses for the city of Oxnard's communities, the communities in Ventura, the communities in El Rio, Santa Paula, Satacoy, Fillmore, and Piru. There's many beneficial uses on this river, and there are a lot of benefits that those communities can have from a free-flowing and ecologically healthy river, both economic and benefits that enhance their well-being, that all people are entitled to. So once that safe yield is developed, then we do feel that the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency has to implement measures to prevent withdrawals in excess of that safe yield. And we have this interim ordinance in effect. We do feel that there needs to be a clear path towards establishing these more permanent protections. So having said that, we would really, at this interim stage, we really want to see the requirement that best available technology, on-farm technology is required to be adopted where those figures are available.
Okay, thank you.
I think I heard you say you support the adoption of this ordinance. So
Well,
if we don't have this,
we
all
would
of this
like-
other information that you asked for, if we don't have the information that you asked for, do you support the adoption of this ordinance, which is our agenda item?
Well, you know, it's doing something is better than nothing, and we do realize this is a temporary, emergency type ordinance that should be adopted.
Thank you.
But we would like to see, at the same time, we do know that the figures for Raspberry we can achieve with that implementation of best available efficiency technology. We can achieve 2.5 acre-feet per acre per year. And this ordinance provides raspberries, the range is 3.1 to 3.4.
So you adopt this ordinance only if we make this change, or if we don't make that change, do you still support adopting the ordinance?
So where available, if you have the data, for instance, for raspberries, for row crops, and for avocados, if you have the data based on the testimony from the growers before you at the last meeting, we'd like to see adjustments to the proposed irrigation allowance.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, very good. Hold on, John. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. My name is Jeremy Lawrentowski. I'm the Parks and Rec Director for the City of Moore Park, and I'll be real brief. I don't want to go on and on about the variance or the change to the ordinance that was suggested by Reddy. I'm just here to let you know that we support it. The temporary allocation over the 10-year period is somewhat skewed based on the fact that the first 5 years of that reporting period, there was very little groundwater reported because of the Callegas program. We are here to support Reddy, whether it be through a variance or a change to the ordinance, and I just want to let you know that here we're to support that.
Okay, thank you. John.
Good afternoon. My name is John Matthews. I'm General Counsel of the Pleasant Valley County Water District. And if you'll allow me, I'll have a short comment. I also serve as General Counsel of the Channel Islands Beach Community Services District. First of all, it goes without saying that everyone, at least in Pleasant Valley, is grateful for the efforts that have been made. I know that every single director up here has taken time. I was surprised when I saw Supervisor Bennett. He's attending these stakeholders meeting, and that's good. I know you've been involved. We've had conversations. I appreciate the ag individuals. And also, I know Jeff has spent a lot of time along with his staff, and you're to be commended for that, and it's appreciated. I want to answer Director Bennett's, Supervisor Bennett's question first. We don't support this ordinance as it's presently constituted. I gave you a letter today, and I apologize you're getting it today. Ag efficiency is new for Pleasant Valley. We've never done it. So when we saw the new ordinance, it was a pretty dramatic change for us. It took me a little time to educate myself. Jeff was polite enough to let me sit down and pick his brain a little bit about it, and the two board members that know more about it. And I'm not going to go over the letter I gave you today. I don't know that it'll make a difference in your vote today or not, but I want to bring up a couple points in that letter that I think are important. At the last stakeholders meeting, I was surprised when I saw a spreadsheet on the amount of water that is used within the Pleasant Valley Basin. So I went back to our general manager and I said, Dave, over the last 10 years, other than 2013, how much water did we pump in our district? We pumped 5,800 acre feet. That serves over 11,000 acre feet. Our average acre foot per acre during that 10-year period is 0.5, I rounded it up to 0.55 acre feet per acre. Now, I don't know much about irrigation efficiency, but that seems pretty good to me. But it may not be enough. Maybe we have to go down to 0.25 acre feet per acre. Nobody's fooling anyone here, and I'm not here to try and pull wool over it. We know why Pleasant Valley is able to do that. We've had a great partnership for many years with United, who has provided us with surface water. The Groundwater Management Agency last month helped continue our existing contract with the Canal Creek project. We bring surface water in. And that's important to us. We think it's important to the basins. In my letter, I gave you a very simple, it's just all I can handle, example of where I think this ordinance may go haywire for PV. And maybe you're just going to tell me at the end of this, get in line, file a variance, and okay, I'm special, Director Craven. So,
Thanks, John, for your detailed
okay.
testimony. The crew appreciates it.
I'm the comedy relief here today.
thanks.
I appreciate that.
Okay, moving right on.
So, yeah, there you go. But I just looked at the ordinance and I thought, okay, I'm not familiar with AI. I admit that, the irrigation efficiency. Take that for what it's worth. But if we have an individual in Pleasant Valley that has 100 acres, and he has a well, and under the ag efficiency, he needs to apply 200 acre-feet of water to grow whatever that crop is. If he pumps his well 100 acre-feet of that, and takes 100 acre-feet from PV, he's applying the 200 acre-feet, he's efficient. If that's all he's focused on, that's okay. But the water that comes from PV can run anywhere from roughly 25% groundwater pumped up to, in some years, almost 100% surface water. So if he makes a decision at some point in time, I don't like PV's increased cost of their water, because now they're buying water from other sources that are more expensive. Or I don't like the quality of Pleasant Valley water. And I don't mean to throw United under the bus, but we do get complaints every once in a while from the water you send us. It has some interesting things in it. If he says,
From an interesting river,
yes,
frankly.
I hear you. If he says, I'm just going to pump my well, all you care about is efficiency. I'll pump the 200 acre-feet from that well. I won't take any more PV water. We're losing the benefit of that surface water, we, collectively. And so in that particular case, if it was a 50-50 blend from PV, rather than pumping just 150 acre-feet from the groundwater, he'd pump 200 acre-feet. That's 100 acres out of our over 11,000. If everybody goes to that, I'm fearful that this ordinance may have some environmental consequences that we really haven't considered. It was mentioned by Director Craven that you have issues with 218. We also are a public agency. We also have to pass along our charges to people pursuant to 218. I had a chance just briefly with Jeff to discuss this. If the ordinance goes into place today, we have to start reporting on efficiency today. You all know that's going to be tough for us. That's going to be an unbelievable, it's going to be a tough grind.
Where did today
Why
come
did you
from?
say you have to report efficiency today?
We have to start accounting for it efficiently today, is what I'm reading here.
No.
August 1st, John.
August 1st.
Okay, okay.
Okay,
Then
you
I
got
stand corrected.
3 months.
Okay, we've got 3 months to get...
Take a vacation.
We've got 3 months to get...
Chill, John, chill.
Okay, we've got 3 months
He just
to
got back.
educate everybody in our district on this, and then start the 218 process, which, as you know, I think 60 days is probably a fair comment on that. I don't know whether or not PV can ever be efficient. I mean, we don't own any property. We don't grow anything. We just pump as little water as possible. I've had a discussion with Carol at Zone, and she's very helpful on that. There are some distinctions that we are special that make us a little different from private mutual water companies, and our mix of growth within the district is substantially different than many of the mutuals that, I don't know many of the mutuals, but some of the mutuals that report on efficiency. We have crops going in and out all the time. We have landowners, tenants, as opposed to tree crops, which makes it slightly easier, I would hope, for those people. Again, I'm not going to bore you with the details of the letter. I mean, if you don't pass the ordinance today, which my position is I hope you don't, because I still think just coming up and getting people on a line of variances, I think recently, if we've learned any lesson, there was a great, I won't say great because I don't want to get you guys to get swollen heads, but the two of you put a letter at the end of the packet. Had that process been started 6 weeks ago, that's a doable process. Work the kinks out and then adopt an ordinance. It's troublesome to me when you adopt legislation and say, don't worry, we'll work the kinks out later. That puts an extreme burden on him. It puts an extreme burden on my clients and some of the other people out here. And I think history will show us that that's really not the way to do things. The way to do things is, whether you want to say that the GMA has done a good job or not in the past, is to do it the way we've done it in the past. I know there's an emergency. I get that. You know, we all get that. I'm going to repeat what I said the first time I was here, is that, you know, you've got everybody's attention. You know, the stakeholders, people are moving as fast as they can. Lately, I felt a little bit like a moth following a light, because when I didn't make the last meeting because I ran away. But if I took that first ordinance that we spent a considerable amount of time on, I mean, we PV staff, and looked at the third ordinance, man, they're not the same ordinance. So that first little part, I know you're getting tired. I know, I can tell when you sigh that I'm talking too much. So I'm going to leave it at that. On Channel Islands, I just want to thank the staff. They put some language in there that deals with the Port Hueneme Water Authority. We had provided some language to them that I think would be better, and maybe the way you'll handle that is to deal with that on another variance or explanation on it, and that's fine. I mean, the board Tuesday night asked us what we thought the language said, and we said we weren't sure, and that's the truth. Our general manager would be here today, but he's got a family issue he's dealing with. So again, we'd like to come back and revisit that time, whether it's in the ordinance if you don't pass it today, or whether or not it's by a variance. Thanks.
Okay.
Any questions?
John, before you leave, on Channel Islands,
Yeah.
will the 5-year versus the 10-year
I don't know that.
affect
I
them?
didn't, Dr. Kelly, I did not ask. I don't know that.
Because they were who I was kind of wondering
Yeah,
about.
I don't know.
They have at least the last 2 that they weren't using their wells at all.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's their issue, and maybe even Gerhard could speak to it more. It's
Certainly.
more of the recognition of their...
Recognition of allocation that they have embedded in the agreement. I did talk with Jared
Yeah, no, you did.
yesterday, and he was, I'll just speak, he was okay with what was proposed. He understood we were trying to encapsulate and reference the agreement, and that's where the allocations are embedded.
Well, I talked to him this morning, so we got
Oh,
a little bit
okay.
different feedback on that.
You know, partially in an interest of trying to continue to educate myself on this, I mean, when I read your letter and about the example that you just gave, which is somebody could just pump their 200 acres,
Right.
you know, right from groundwater
Right.
instead of taking that. So I have these questions. They're not to be, I'm just trying to,
Sure.
you know, get further.
Fair enough.
That, if everybody does that, of course, we wouldn't achieve groundwater savings, you know, if everybody...
I don't know that, but I...
Okay, but so that would be part of, you know, I mean, part of what we're saying, we think this is going to work, and if it doesn't, we're going to have to take, you know, some modification. But wouldn't those 100 acres that they didn't take of surface water be available for some other grower to be able to use, and they would not necessarily have to pump
Sure.
groundwater?
Yeah,
So
within our system, because we basically take it into our system and blend it with our other...
So it wouldn't necessarily mean it all groundwater. It may mean somebody may pump more groundwater, somebody else may have more surface water available for them. I just wanted to make sure.
Correct. My point in that example was, it's, as Chair Mulhart has pointed out before, is unintended consequences. But in this case, it was more, and I don't want to sound like a lawyer up here, it's more of, are there...
But John, turn on and
I
say
know,
that my name is John Matthews and I'm an attorney. Go ahead, you can do that.
But the point of, it's more specific than that, it's probably more sinister than that, is I think that's an environmental issue that you should look at, because it is a possibility that that could happen. It's not saying it's going to happen, but when we take that water into our system, whether it's surface or groundwater, we blend it, and certainly other people could take that water, but they might not. We might see a domino effect as our rates go up, where people just start to pump their well more and more, as long as they're efficient.
And certainly if that happens, we've got a problem.
Agreed.
You know, as we have to deal with. Thanks.
John, you've been a good sport taking all the abuse.
Oh, whatever. I understand I owe everybody a dinner or something,
Yes,
or a trip to
you do.
Disneyland.
Yes, you do. And for everybody in the room...
Not today.
Yeah, not today. The problem in, I know there's a number of PV growers in the area, and you know, the issue of changing the way PV has operated for years is a huge sea change. I get that, okay? It is not going to be easy for you folks in Pleasant Valley to change the way you mentally look at where and how you deliver and where you and how supply that water. We have the same problem at United on the PTP system. And United is actively, aggressively approaching the issue such that United will never get a surcharge bill again in the future and have to pay that bill. That's exactly the concern that PV raises, that if they wind up with a bunch of surcharges, because PV is responsible for AIA, then where does PV come up with the money to pay that? That mental shift has gone on at United. We've come to grips with that. We have the exact same problem. Different area, but a lot of the same customers on different fields. My statement to you and my statement to PV is that what you have to realize is that PV is not the end user of the water. They supply water to an end user. It is the responsibility of that end user to make sure that they do not exceed the allocation for that crop on that piece of ground. And hence, that surcharge should never come to PV. Now, that may mean that you're going to have to change your contracts. It may mean that you have to send a letter out. The board yesterday just told staff at United, Mike, to send a letter out immediately to the PTP pumpers that they need to understand that henceforth the GMA is going to change the rules of the game, and we at United are going to respond accordingly. And if there is overage in the amount of water you use, you're going to get the bill. We'll probably have to send the check, but we're coming after you for the money. And if you don't like those terms, there goes the valve. We said we're going to get Dr. Stiles to crunch the numbers. We said we're going to get a group of distinguished growers to sit down and revise this form. United has spent money to put in the tracking systems to track this. My comment to PV is that the game has changed, and the way that PV operates and the way they look at this process may also have to change. I agree with you that PV should never have to pay a bill. The bill should be paid by the end user down the road. If you look at why PV was put in place, if you look at the history from the 1920s when we recognized that we had overdraft and we came up with systems and the Santa Clara River Conservation District was formed. They dealt with it in 1927 and turned us back to artesian conditions. Boom, the war ends in 1940 and we're still starting to see overdraft, and by 1950 we have problems in the city of Oxnard joins with the Santa Clara River Conservation and creates United. The bond that was issued built the San Felice Dam and the pipeline to go to PV. Why did they put the pipeline into PV? Because PV historically has been the biggest problem area within the county, and it is today. All the charts that we show up here show that PV, that area of PV, has the biggest imbalance of water. You've gotten 500,000 acre-feet from United and others. You've done a great job of putting it to beneficial use, and what has happened in the PV area is we've expanded acreage and we expanded crops. I mean, my dad tells me, he recalls when he was a late teenager pulling the family thrashing machine down the road to thrash beans up by Round Mountain, all dry bean farming. So that has all changed because we now have the ability to pump and deliver water and create the huge success that we have in PV. And we have a hole in PV. And we've had that hole since the 1950s, through the 60s, 70s, and we have it today. The only way we're going to solve the long-term problem of the overdraft on the Oxnard Plain and in PV in particular is we're going to have to make a huge mental shift. It is a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift that I believe that PV has to make is that you have to figure out how to say to your growers, we're going to hold you accountable for your water. If you overpump, you're going to pay the bill. When we first did this ordinance, we said that it's a 10% cutback across the board. You stood before us and said, oh my gosh, if we do that, we've bankrupted you because we've given you a $10 million bill or some number in that range. So in January, when we first addressed this issue, January, February, March, and here we are in mid-April, and we're still dealing with the same issue. I would submit to you that we haven't raced it to the end line. Yes, it's probably been faster than what we've done before, but in the process, we've come up with a irrigation index methodology that I think puts the burden on the grower to manage his operation. And in the process of doing that, we're going to have to work through the nuances that go on in the PV area. And I would hope that you guys would support it. I accept the fact that you don't support it. And I think the primary reason, I can't say that because I don't know why. I do hear the message, and I've heard it from you before us, and you've told me privately, the bill that could come to PV would be astronomical. And I don't want that bill to come to you. We got to push it on to the end users. I think you can do that. I think United's going to do that. United has to do that. And if we don't do that, United's going to be paying a bill that we shouldn't be paying. And you guys are going to be paying a bill that you shouldn't be paying. You've said to me you've got growers in your area that are very efficient, and you've got growers that are not efficient, and it's not fair to put that on the efficient growers. So I believe that this ordinance gets us in that direction. But the internal mechanics of how you do it at PV is not the GMA's responsibility.
Can I respond? I mean, I don't want to take everybody's time, but I'd love to sit down and discuss with you. While PV and United have great similarities, there are substantial differences, but that's not of interest to people here. I think one of the primary things I'm hearing here, again, I want to go back to the simple fact, we're using a half an acre foot per acre. Drive through PV.
No, wait, let me back up. That's what PV is delivering, right? You said
well, the whole PV basin. Let me take the whole PV basin, which is bigger than PV. You'll see this in my letter. I don't want to, but it's now become important. If you take the whole basin, we're pumping 7,814. Now that's a bigger area. So yeah, that half acre foot is going to bump it to maybe 0.7 acre feet per acre. The point being is that there's going to be a rub here at some point in time because I think we're going to have a discussion of do the growers have to report all their water that they get, including surface water. I'm going to get a bill, not I, that's the royal I, it's PV will get a bill, and yet to me it's a jurisdictional area. You all have jurisdiction over groundwater. I don't think PV will be reporting to you our surface water on an efficiency. I mean, unless you guys can tell me that you have authority over surface water, but we'll report what we pump, the grower will report what they pump, and it's going to look awfully efficient. Because I know we're going to get less water from United, but we're getting water from the creek, where we're going to at least 3 more projects, one outside the county to bring water in. We're going to look awfully efficient. So unless you're saying, hey, look, we're going to ding you for the imported water too, then we've got a real problem. We're butting heads. We're not solving groundwater problems now. We're just butting heads. So it becomes a jurisdictional problem. I agree with everything you said. There are nuances here. There are discussions that could be had, and that's why I liked the 2-page proposal you guys put through. That's why we've been pushing for a long time. Let's allow this to kind of cook for a little while, and I just think that we're going to run into, we got 2 trains on track. I want to keep the 2 trains being on one track coming this way, frankly.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Who's next? Who wants to speak? Lucy.
Good afternoon. Lucy McGovern with the City of Camarillo. I appreciate all the work everybody's done on this. You addressed about 80% of my comments at the start of the meeting, and they had to do with equitability, and I'm glad that you recognize that this is going to be a shared burden, and Camarillo is willing to step up to the challenge there. And I'm glad that there's going to be regular review of performance, and appreciate that. And I'll do whatever we can to help share that. We anticipate that this ordinance is going to be adopted, so we're already working on it. Whether it happens today or next week, we're there right now. So that is definitely, you answered the question that I had on how does the proposed project that I presented at the last regular meeting was going to be affected by this, and so I appreciate that is going to take a separate track. The one thing that occurred to me is you've got this variance language, and I see now a laundry list of variances occurring here and people requesting. So I hope that when you're considering those, how does that affect the bottom line? So that is something that I wanted to be on the record on. For Camarillo, whether it's a 10-year median or an average or a 5-year average, it doesn't really matter. For us, it's still a 1,300 acre-foot a year cutback from last year at a value of about $2 million. That is not taken into account in our water budget. So that is something that we're tackling right now, and that is, I'm going to be briefing our council on this, and we're going to be taking that up at very soon. So in the meantime, we're preparing for that $2 million hit, and we're going to probably pay for it out of the reserves. And we're also, so that is, I just wanted to let you know that on a monetary level, that is definitely going to occur. And as far as efficiency within the city, 2/3 of our water usage is residential, and they are on a per acre usage, it's close to 0.5. The other third is from agriculture, landscape, industrial, and commercial. And those are around 2 acre-feet per acre, and we're going to focus our efforts towards reducing those to at least 1. So just wanted to let you know that is definitely a goal. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Any questions?
I do have one.
Yes.
I appreciate your comments, and you talked about your residential use. Do you do it on a per acre basis residential, or do you do it on a per household base? And do you make a distinction between internal use, basically sewer, and landscaping use?
We do both. Okay. So when we typically we have a per account basis, and we're tracking that monthly. We have to report it to the Department of Water Resources on an annual basis. And but for this particular instance, we actually went ahead and counted the amount of acreage that we have residential customers in, and we went ahead and kind of did a comparable analysis.
Do you have any kind of tier rate that gives everybody per household a certain amount, and then their acreage gets a different amount, or?
No.
Okay, thank you.
No, the tiers are just based on account.
Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, very good.
Some
Yes, ma'am.
larger accounts, residential, do have landscaping meters, but they're still charged that way.
Okay. Jurgen, do you want to speak?
Jurgen Gramco, a grower in Oxnard. Just wanted to say that this process gives waterboarding a whole new meaning. I wanted to thank Directors Borchert and Kelly for their personal involvement in trying to resolve some of these issues with agriculture, and staff has been very open and very involved. So clearly there's nobody going to say we weren't heard. I mean, everyone was heard. Everyone had an opportunity to express their viewpoints and their concerns, and I'm kind of feeling like I'm kind of feel like the old saying, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. And the reason I say that is that I think the efficiency formula is a tried and true and solidly backed, scientifically proven process, but it requires some good information in order to make it work. And for us to jump from where we are today into the efficiency ordinance means that staff is going to have a big challenge in the form of assimilating and validating all the information. And I would ask that that you support the staff, because this isn't going to happen with the amount of staff time you have. It's going to take more. You've mentioned Dr. Stiles. He's going to have to spend a lot of time. These numbers do require some refinement. So in order for us to get to the point where we're actually seeing some real tight statistical groupings of crop uses, we're not there today. I'm optimistic we can get there, but the devil's going to be in the details, to use another phrase. I want to go one step further. This is an emergency ordinance, and we pass it today or we pass something tomorrow. You've always, Director Mulhart, you've always said, well, Jurgen's the guy that wanted to make this market-driven. And
I didn't say it that way. I've said though. But those were your words, not your motions.
Those were my words, and those are still my words. I mean, I really believe that the market will drive conservation, as do tiered rates in residential uses. And we have talked in some of these stakeholder meetings about a replenishment fee. And I think that the first order of business after the emergency ordinance ought to be a replenishment fee. Forget about figuring out how to use it. We know that we'll ultimately find deserving projects for this fee. We need to get a fee in place. It needs to be a real fee. And, I probably have a target on the back of my head now, but it needs to be a real fee. It needs to be $100 an acre foot. It might need to be more. And when you start putting those kinds of costs on water, guess what? You don't need an emergency ordinance. People start paying attention to it because it's a cost. It's a real cost. And so that essentially solves your problem from both directions. Creates money for supply. It forces demand on an economic basis. It forces down demand because of the economics. So you really need to go to that as soon as you possibly can. And then just to take another target off the back of my head and to address Mr. Weiner's comments, we do raspberries at 2.5 acre feet, and the irrigation index, I think, calls for 3 and 3 over. But we are one of very few growers who are experimenting with a process called substrate, wherein we produce the raspberries in pots, and they have computerized irrigation, and the investment to make all that work is very high. At this point, it isn't proven yet whether the productivity will justify it. I made those comments in regard to the 2.5 acre feet in the context of the discussion of the time, which was about a historical allocation. What I was saying at that time was, here we are really driving the technology into this direction. We now have a historical use on that particular acreage of 2.5 acre feet driven by all this technology. Well, I can't afford to take another 20% hit on that. That is at the technological forefront. So 2.5 acre feet was really a selfish way to protect that allocation. It wasn't to say, this is the standard for all raspberries, because all raspberries they're grown in the ground. They're not grown in pots, and it's an entirely different method.
Okay, thanks, Jurgen. Scott.
Thank you, Board. My name is Scott Deerdorf. I'm a conventional and organic vegetable grower in the Oxnard Plains. And one topic I want to bring up is the perception that this is a temporary ordinance when in fact it is not. Nowhere in the ordinance does it mention the fact that this is temporary. In my opinion, it reads more like it's a permanent ordinance. Even though it's sort of titled an emergency ordinance, there's nothing in there that has a sunset date or termination date, merely a review process at the end of 18 months. So I think what was been addressed in the Farm Bureau's letter is
our desire to put that sort of termination date or sunset date in there to allow the stakeholders to weigh in on whether the ordinance should be, reviewed and renewed or scrapped in favor of something that stakeholders have put together that might be more effective or at least as effective without being as, or more equitable to get to the same goal line. Especially David Borchard and Supervisor Bennett have been participating in a lot of these stakeholder meetings and appreciate that, and staff too. But I think with the absence of a termination date or a sunset date, it doesn't give the stakeholders that option to come back and state their case or at least present other options that might be better. And I think that's been shown here today that, how that process needs that termination date. I mean, we're on version 3, or actually I think maybe version 6 based on all the versions that have gone on just in one day. And we've come a long ways in a very short period of time. And I think this has started the process of stakeholder meetings that have done some real work, as the two people that I've seen on those stakeholder meetings can attest to. So I think the process has started, and I think you've heard some testimony even from some of the people that have come up and talked and referred to this ordinance as temporary. I think Pushtoyo referred to it as a temporary ordinance. Someone from Parks and Recs referred to it as a temporary ordinance, when in fact it's not. So I would advocate that we have a date in there in the Article 5 that terminates the ordinance, and it obviously can always be brought up again in its current form or in a changed form or a different ordinance altogether that would get us to where we need to get with more buy-in from all the stakeholders. So those are my comments, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you, Chairman Earlhart. I'm Steve Nash. I live in the city of Oxnard, and we've kind of expanded the scope of this discussion. But I want to bring up a couple of things. I do think it is unfair to M&I users that are already below their historical allocation to go through further restrictions. To me, that's rewarding or that's penalizing good behavior. So I do have a problem with that. I do want to at least speak for the residents of Oxnard. And ultimately, I don't know how our city council will act, but we do not owe the GMA anything. We do not owe United anything. We do not owe PV anything. So if they want, our water from the Advanced Water Purification Facility, which is the highest quality water in Ventura County, they're going to have to pay top dollar for it, and they're going to have to pay for the infrastructure to deliver it. So this would be, I talked about this at the United meeting on Wednesday, but the more I think about it, the more it makes sense to me that whatever water Oxnard produces from the AWPF should stay in Oxnard, and if we have any excess water, then it will be available at a market-driven price. So I just want to make that clear to everybody. That would be my recommendation to our city council. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan.
Hello, Susan Rundgren, City of Ventura. Excuse me, since we're all making our wish lists, I wanted to just say if you guys are going to do the ordinance today, if you're going to approve it, I agree with Reddy as far as the 5 years. It helps us out rather than the 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Frank?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Frank Bermanshankel, Real Plaza Water Company. I have to cancel out Susan's vote on going to the 5 years. It was about 5 years ago when Real Plaza Water Company went with a tiered rate structure. So if you do it, and I don't know what the numbers are because I was assuming it was going to be a 10-year, so that would have a dramatic impact on a small company in El Rio. So
okay.
For what it's worth, and I think Reddy's got more time and manpower to do a request for a waiver. So stick with it,
Frank, if you would,
Frank.
Are your clients on sewer or septic?
They're sewered, all sewered now.
So you could get some numbers on your discharges then from your meter users?
The metered users?
Yeah, if they have metered water, they have to be discharging it in their toilet, and if your toilet's going to a sewer, you can figure out how much their output is. I mean, there's some consideration of trying to do an allocation basis rather than a historical, and I'm asking you how you would do that.
It's just a tiered rate structure. It's the same for everybody. I mean, you get your first 6 units for X, and you get the next 6 for...
The
issue is how much your allocation would be for your entire community, but obviously you haven't thought about that, so...
No, I mean, the
another day.
allocation formula is changing every day, and
Yeah.
you know,
Well, that's what makes life fun.
I guess so.
Truth is a moving target.
Yeah.
I get, Frank, what he's...
Make Reddy do the work.
I think what Mike is asking is, one way of accounting is look at the water usage per household based on, and the way M&I folks, as I understand it, back it in, is they look at the amount of sewage that's coming out from the houses. And when you do that, you come up with a number that reflects water in, water out, least to the sewage system on a household basis. So
Actually, I think that what most of us do is look at low water, high rain months and go by the January one. I don't think we look at sewer because you have a lot of industries that have high water consumption and maybe a lot of water.
But like in residential, if you have a high-end neighborhood in Pasadena or Beverly Hills or something, they use a lot more water because they irrigate everything. But if you look at the sewer line, South Central or whatever other neighborhood we might have comparable here, that's primarily just
I was responding to
sewer
Lynn
plant.
that most cities would use the sewer as a way of judging how much you use residentially.
Yeah, okay.
As opposed to, and I'm saying, I think the standard is to use a high rain month like January
Yeah,
to
okay.
determine that, to determine residential consumption.
The thing that's been thrown at me some is that health and sanitation are paramount, and that would be the same whether it's a household income of $1 million a year versus a household of $10,000 a year. They're probably going to use the same number of flushes per day per person.
Okay,
I don't
thanks,
think
Frank.
so.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the wastewater is not metered as it goes out. It goes into a collection system that ends up in Oxnard, but there's 5 other systems that dump into it before it gets there. So knowing the exact amount that comes from this particular area would be very difficult to do. But we can look at the low month of the year usage.
Okay, thanks. Jim, hold on one, yes, come forward, yes. I'm wait. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is John Erb from Driscoll's, and I've been really pleased to see the level of collaboration from the stakeholders, actually. Obviously, staff as well as others have contributed, and that's been great from the GMA board. I wanted to echo a couple things, like that Jurgen commented around longer-term solutions and replenishment fee. I'm very much in favor of that. I'd like to hear from the board as well about how those types of funds could be the mechanisms for how those could be designated for longer-term projects. That might be built into, hardwired into what you guys do, because it sounds like you've done things in the past.
Let me. First of all, I really appreciate both you and Jurgen saying we need a basin replenishment fee. I think Scott has said that at one time. I think everybody finally gets that. There's some mechanical problems, and the mechanical problem is I'm not sure it's within the GMA legislation to allow us to do that, and how the mechanism for us to do that. Right. United has the ability to collect fees and build projects. I'm not sure the GMA has ability to collect fees for that kind of issue, and it doesn't have the ability to build projects. The only way, if we had the ability to collect some kind of basin replenishment plan, it's outside the world of surcharges, and that is potentially problematic. If we were able to do that, it would become effectively a grant that we then would give to who did the project. Then you run into the mechanics of it. If it's a private project, you can't do that because that's a gift of public funds. So the mechanics, the concept is right. I absolutely agree with the concept. And it may be that it has to be for United to do that. If United were to do that, then it would be within United's boundaries, and United's boundaries are not the same boundaries of the GMA. So it may require that we have to get some legislative relief. I don't know. But the concept that you're proposing, that others proposed, I believe is in fact the answer. And I think I ran for Farm Bureau at one point. I gave it to John Chris and I gave it to Rob. You know, if you take the pumping on the Oxnard Plain only at 100,000 acre feet, which is our current, or in the GMA boundaries, which is our current safe yield at $100 an acre foot, you're generating a lot of cash, and that cash could pay for the bonds to build a lot of complexes that could in fact regenerate the water that we're having to cut back. So the concept that you guys are raising is totally valid. The mechanics of getting there may be a little bit difficulty, but it can be solved.
Well, and Scott also touched on a sunset date, and I understand the reasons why you might not go that route, but I think that keeping stakeholders highly engaged, we respond to dates and, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so there's some practical considerations there about keeping all the stakeholders heavily engaged.
Yeah, let me speak to that, since both of you and Scott raised it. Council has told us repeatedly that we cannot leave an emergency ordinance in place for a long duration. That's not what an emergency ordinance has. If we converted it from an emergency ordinance to a drought ordinance, a plain Jane ordinance, absolutely we have to have a sunset in there, because there's no legal counsel saying, and we had this problem up in the Los Postos area where we had emergency ordinance D and we rolled it over a couple of times, and eventually council says you can't do that anymore, and we had to undo it. So the emergency ordinance, by the way it's constructed per council, is it does not have an infinite life. He will not permit that. So it really has to be moved from an emergency into a permanent ordinance if we so decide. So if you actually look through the ordinance as I read it, if you actually go into selected paragraphs where it talks about the implementation on February 1, 25, okay, the board may by resolution take additional there's one checkpoint. So we have a checkpoint already built in come February 1, where we are going to have a public process to either change the index, go to a different system. We're going to have that discussion. We have another one in August. And then finally, in the duration, it says it needs to be reviewed every 18 months unless superseded or rescinded by action of the board. That would be turning it into a permanent ordinance or just wiping it out. So we also have that ability, or finding by the board that the drought and emergency conditions no longer exist. And given the fact that a bunch of the findings are referencing the state and the local drought issue, if those findings aren't valid anymore, that kind of drives the issue. So I recognize it's not a perfect answer because it doesn't have a date time certain, but I believe that there's a series of checks and balances in there. And I believe clearly that you folks are going to hold us to the fire. I appreciate that. I think that's your job. And I think we have enough escape clauses to get out of that. So that's kind of my answer to that.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to tell you that you should be pleased that when we first got a hold of it, it said till a warm place froze over. And that didn't happen. I think it was Director Borchard suggested that was very inappropriate. So we no longer have to wait for the warm place to freeze.
Well, lastly, I just want to applaud the effort in making this monumental shift toward the efficiency model. I think it's the right thing to do, so I appreciate that.
Excellent. Very good. Can somebody, Mike, can you make sure Jim makes it up? When Jim takes the time to come to speak to this board, I want to listen. So
I have a walker, but
that's all right. Jim, your time is our time.
While he's on his way, I would suggest to you he's my banker for my first land purchase.
I'm Jim Lloyd Butler, Mr. Chairman Mohart, and members of the board. I'm not opposing, I certainly will not oppose the ordinance, but I just wanted to make sure one thing was perfectly, as Mr. Nixon would say, it's perfectly clear. We used water, when John brought up the PV problem with water from the surface water and water from the from wells. I was thinking, in our case, last year we used about 29 acre feet from the 29% of our water was from the river, and the rest of it was from wells. And what I was thinking we would do is just we report both to GMA and to United. So we would just take the two and put them together, and that's what we would report. Is that what you would want us to do?
My concept is, yes, that's what we'd want you to do. We need to know the total water you're using from the sources.
Yeah.
So that would work.
Yeah. That's all I wanted to know.
Well, it's good to see you, Jim.
Thank you.
Rob.
Just a supplemental comment on the comment you made about your enabling legislation. I met yesterday with Ernie Villegas, the chief of staff for Assemblyman Gorel, and they're ready and waiting for language, Jeff, to put a spot bill in and to give you whatever language you deem necessary in order to modify your enabling legislation to perhaps accomplish some of these fees or other projects.
What's Pratt been doing anyway?
Pardon?
What's Pratt been doing anyway?
I have no idea, but he's probably going to miss me today. But I guess we're waiting for a drink on this guy, but we probably owe him one. One other thing, he also said that they've been having meetings with the governor's office, and because of the drought situation, the governor's taken a real personal interest in any community that's having specific problems in getting through any permitting through the State Water Resources Board, DWR, and to the extent that there's any municipality down here that's having a problem with regarding a water-related recycling project for the permitting, he will step in.
Interesting enough, I'm glad you said that. I got effectively the same message when I was in Sacramento. It came from the Senate panel that I spoke to after the meeting. What tools do you need to do your job?
Yeah.
And we want to pass that authority down to the local level and not have to deal with it at the state.
It's the point that he'll get on the phone right to the agency head and say, make it happen, is what I've been hearing.
The environment now is to move as much control as we can to the local level, and then they expect us to do our job.
Right.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Who else would like to speak? Yes, sir.
Hello. My name's Steve Dodge. I represent a ownership interest in a ranch in Oxnard, on the Oxnard Plains. Years ago, there was a pump on the ranch, and it was taken over by United Water. And United Water is not going to be supplying the ranch anymore. And it looks like this ordinance is going to be like shutting us out completely of any water.
Can somebody race out real quick and catch Mike Solomon? Because he is the GM of United. Have you met Mike Solomon?
No.
Okay, I'm gonna. Did we lose him? No, you didn't. Mike. All right.
He got up and left when he saw this gentleman coming. He didn't want to answer him.
Oh, cry me a river, I don't care.
Hey, at 5:15, I walked out in my driveway to get my paper, and water was running down because my water heater broke. So we all have bad stories.
Mike, this gentleman has a problem with a well on his property, his ranch property, as he's a part owner in Oxnard, and he says that United took over that well, and under this ordinance, he has no other source of water.
It doesn't serve him anymore.
So anyway, I don't know the particulars, but this is the gentleman you need to talk to.
Okay.
Yeah. Mike is not going to make an answer now with the number of board members in this room.
Okay, from my understanding is that they're going to shut down all the wells on Rice Road.
Oh, you're talking about the PTP.
I don't know what.
Okay. That's the man. You talk to the man.
But I mean,
if it's shut down,
They're going to run out in July.
Well, hold on. Gentlemen, stop. You need to go out in the hall and talk to Mike. Thanks.
There's another man over here who was getting up.
Where did I see a hand? Oh, yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Chris Halstead. I'm with Fukutomi Farms. We are a Maine seasoned strawberry grower, and a few years back when you guys had announced to us that there was going to be the efficiency allocations, or they were going to change, the efficiency rates were going to change, we made some expensive investments and attempts to reduce our water, and we have reduced our water usage by 27%. And I wanted to say that by cutting back the allowance by 25%, even after the amount that we have cut back our water, we're going to have a hard time being able to meet that goal. The only way I can see meeting that goal without making future expensive investments that we don't have the money for is to cut back the amount of property. That being said, I support the ordinance in the fact that we cannot do nothing. Something has to be done. And I feel like you've put enough pathways in there to make changes in the future that need to be changed. I just ask that you keep the irrigation allowances fluid and revisit them often enough to make sure that they are allowing people to keep their livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to compliment you. That's really exactly the spirit that I think we all have to take in terms of water here. We got to do something, and you're willing to do your share. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you want to do?
I think we need to move forward.
Okay.
I don't think we can continue to delay it. The longer we delay it, the worse the situation's going to be.
Well, okay, we can do that, or just go around the room first. Okay, Steve?
I have a few comments, but I'll start off by saying I agree with Charlotte. I do want to say the regulation of groundwater is one of the most important government functions that exist in Ventura County. And it's going to take hardworking and honorable people coming together for us to get the policy right and something that's really in the long-term best interest of everybody. So I really appreciate that a whole lot of people have shown up since January. People have, and a lot of professional input has been given by all kinds of people trying to give this input to staff, et cetera. And I just think a lot of people have really worked hard in trying to get us to this point. Everybody recognizes we don't have the end product at all at this point in time. But I've been impressed with how much people have been willing to say, a little bit like this gentleman ended the conversation. I mean, what a perfect person to end it on. Yeah, this is going to be really tough on us, but we can't do nothing. We have to go do something. So I think that's the spirit that we go forward. The second, as we move to a new water culture in Ventura County, truly efficient use of water has to become the fundamental foundation of this new culture. There's just no other way around it. You can't sit there any longer and say it's okay for some people to use water inefficiently in Ventura County. And so I, didn't mention it when John Matthews was up here, but to the extent, if somebody's getting surface water, that doesn't mean that we should say, well, it's okay for them to use their water inefficiently because they have some surface water or whatever the situation is. The standard has to be, if you're not using it efficiently, something should happen to try to get you to use it efficiently. It's a little bit like the market standard that Jürgen has referred to. The third thing, I think this creates an opportunity. I keep hearing from farmers that, we're efficient, but boy, there's some other people that aren't efficient. I hope you guys do something for those people. Well, this is an opportunity for everybody in agriculture and everybody in municipal and everybody industrial to fully come on board and get efficient, and just know that the public spotlight will get brighter and brighter on people that are not efficient users as we go forward. I want to emphasize, because I think it's going to be hard, if we have heavy rain next winter, I think it's going to be hard next February for people to say we should still do something. but it'll be incumbent upon us to have the long-term vision of recognizing that's exactly how we kind of got into this spot. Is when it rained, we went, we could kick this down the road, and we can't. We have to come up with better long-term sustainable and more permanent ordinance as we go forward. The small M&I users, I think, we've made that case. We had the one district come forward, et cetera. I hope the variance procedure works fairly, reasonably, and people don't abuse it. I hope we don't have just people filing and filing and filing as we go forward. It's there to try to bring us good government results where we can do things that we just can't possibly micromanage in this ordinance as we go forward. We have in there a ban on new wells, and we can't keep a ban on new wells forever in this ordinance. And so people who are concerned that this ordinance is going to last forever, I think that's not the issue. I think that we also have an agenda item here that calls for a planning process that the Fox County Groundwater Management Agency is going to engage in, and everybody is invited to participate in it. And it will be very clear where we're going to be. You can know now that in July we're going to be talking about this topic. It's just going to be that clear so people can be prepared and stuff. But that is the process, and I actually think that it just makes sense, and it helps make the case, if anybody ever wanted to adjudicate this or whatever, that our true intention is for this to be temporary, and we want to replace it with something that's better, that's been more thoughtfully thought out and had more time in terms of vigorously going through that. And the final thing that I'd like to say is, it was mentioned by Director Borchert about gaming, and I've had a number of farmers who really want to stay confidential come forward and say, yeah, there are people that are going to game this system, as it goes forward. And if that happens, one of two things can happen if a lot of people do that, is we won't see reductions come down because they're just, everybody will say, I got mine, or we'll lose confidence that the numbers will come down, but that the numbers are not accurate in terms of going forward. And so I think it's incumbent upon everybody to know that this is a public process, and the filing of your efficiency standards is a public document, and there will be people that will be paying attention. And again, there's probably no better regulation than just having the spotlight out there for the public to know. And it's worked in lots of other places, that the best regulators are everybody else in the community that uses water and wants to make sure other people are not gaming the system. So I hope that we do have, that cooperation with the system as it goes forward. So I look forward to the second thing after this, which is a healthy discussion of a planning process that could be good for us as we move forward. Now, I do want to sincerely take where we were and the energy in the room and the frustration in the room when the ordinance first came out, and take where we are now, and it's a compliment to everybody who's gotten involved in the process to get us this far. So thank you very much, everybody. I'd be ready to support Charlotte the direction she wanted to go in terms of moving forward.
Mike?
Well, I want to sort of agree with Supervisor Bennett's statements. I just really want to appreciate and thank all the people who helped us to get where we are. It was not a simple process, but by moving forward now, as Director Craven has suggested, I think we at least get ourselves going and not wait till the crisis is over. Some of mankind's greatest achievements have occurred because of the wars we went through in the past century. And, I had a friend out at Magoo, and I told him one day, we'll never get to the moon. And little did I realize we were going to get to the moon within 2 years after I made that stupid statement. So you never know what's coming down the road. And good improvements in technology is really it, I went to school with this girl. She had a very strong German accent. Wagner was her last name. Little did I know that her dad was one of Werner von Braun's people, so.
David?
I just wanted the rest of the ag community who didn't know it, that Director Kelly really did yeoman's work on a lot of these changes. And it's really, I think it's just a great tribute to the way people pull together in this county. And I just think it was based on a sense of trying to achieve fairness. And so I really wanted to compliment Director Kelly on Idle's efforts publicly, and that everybody in the room know that. It was really a huge effort and pulled a lot of disparate entities together that I think came together with something that most folks can live with. The other point I really wanted to make a point of, and the variance process is, it's important that it's in the ordinance for all the reasons we've heard. But I think we need to be very careful that actual variances granted are probably few and far between. Because Director Bennett said, instead of everybody getting a variance, we could get into that situation very quickly. We all in our own minds are special for one reason or another. We've all got individual cases or reasons why we deserve different attention. But at the end of the day, I think we all have to realize also that we've got a problem with overdraft and seawater intrusion, and we're going to have to meet safe yield, and there's going to be sacrifices from all. And so I don't think I would encourage any change in anything in the ordinance, but I would encourage staff that these things have to be looked at very closely, and I do believe they probably need to be brought to the board on a case-by-case basis. To be granting variances at the staff level without them kind of seeing the light of day, I think raises the possibility of accusations of unfairness and of unequal treatment, and I just don't think we want to go down that road.
If you look at the process that we've been through, I'm absolutely amazed and pleased that we have tackled a massive issue. I think we've said it before. This is the biggest boardroom that this agency has seen in terms of attendance consistently over a long period of meetings, and I think it speaks to the board of the importance of what we're dealing with. And I appreciate the work that you guys have done, the work that we've all done in our own separate ways, staff. There's a number of folks out in the audience that go unsung, that have been talking to people and raising issues and working on drafts and helping us change language. I think in the grand spirit of the way this agency has operated over the years, we have actually done it the way we intended it. And I think, John, you were right when you said on the first day and you spoke to us, this is not the way we've done it in the past. I know you don't agree with where we are right now, but the truth of the matter is we have actually done this as a group, and I think that speaks well for us as an agency. So I really am thankful for that. I think the other message that we ought to deliver and make sure people understand, this ordinance is not the end, it's the beginning, it's a process. I have committed to staff that I will not pull off the throttle if you like. The board doesn't know that, but it's important that we do our homework. Jurgen was absolutely correct, as he was years ago, that there's and I won't wave my hands like you made fun of me, but there's a market element of this. But there is a lot of heavy lifting we have to do to make this ordinance work to get where we want. And I indicated we're not going to do it at this board meeting, and I would hope that staff would put it on the agenda as soon as possible. We've got to get Dr. Stiles engaged. It's going to require money. There is money in the agency's funds to do that. We have to have money to put together a select group of growers to work on the form. We've got to get some money spent on adjusting our computer program, the online program to filing. We've got to spend money on outreach. We're going to have to spend money on figuring out how we can raise money, and so that's going to require some legislative relief if necessary. So our work as an agency will not stop with this. We're going to talk about a process here as the second item. I know a lot of you are going to scatter, and I understand that, but this next issue is going to be equally as important because it's how we make this ordinance work, and I think we owe it to ourselves to do that. So I'm pleased with where we are. It's not perfect. I think there's some checks and balances in it. I like that. I like the work everybody's done, and so I would support moving forward.
Yeah, I'm ready to make a motion, but I just want to say something. Because of the questions I asked and everything today, I want people not to think that I'm really an ag versus M&I person. I have supported water conservation since day one. I tried to get the city of Camarillo to introduce a water conservation ordinance long before it did in the early 90s. And I like to joke and say that when my lawnmower went to college, I got rid of the grass. When in actuality, when my son graduated from high school, we did remove the grass and we put in cactus and a few drought-tolerant things, mainly cactus in the front yard. And after that, we divided our backyard, so we have 6 fruit trees with some mulch, and we have artificial grass on the other side. It always looks nice, and I don't have to do much to it. But I fully believe that people in cities could do much, much, much more to cut their water usage. And I've tried to make it so that my family has cut that. In the winter months, I can show you consistently since about 1992, we've used 1 to 2 units of water per month, and that's 735 gallons equals a unit. We hand carry water out and water our plants. I think a lot of people could do a lot more in the cities, but I felt that we needed to do something with agriculture because they use so much more water than people in cities. And in the summer months, our consumption in our household does go up to about 10 to 12 units. And we have almost always had 3 people living in our household for various reasons as people come back and go, and now we got a grandson living there. But I think that we all have to work together for this. So I'm going to make a motion that we adopt Emergency Ordinance E as introduced and as sent to us about 11 o'clock today, because we've had various versions of it.
Does that include the changing from and to or?
That includes changing the 2 ands to become 2 ors under H, Article 2, H 1 and 2. It does not include other changes that have been requested.
Okay. That's the motion.
I'll second it. I just want to be clear. It includes all the changes staff recommended, but not changes recommended by people in the audience, right?
Right.
Right. Okay, got it.
The changes as we got them.
From staff.
And the addition of the changing 2
Great.
ands to 2 ors.
Right.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Yes, a little bit. The last-minute changes at 11 o'clock, I think were good ones. I have no problem with it. But I think as a policy matter, that's not a good way to go about passing ordinances. And so,
Okay. Hopefully, our next issue will address some of that. So.
Well, I'm grateful, though, that we had our 11th hour change, because that brought a clarity to the fallowing of land, which I think is going to be very important in allowing growers to set aside a bit of soil so they can actually finish a crop this year and help, when I was in food purchases for the military, we actually bought Ventura County produce and took it to Florida because of the quality. And I was dismayed as a taxpayer that was happening, but I was with it when I was in Florida with the government, and by golly darn it, Ventura County continues to be the source of some of the best human edible products. We don't grow cow feed here. We grow stuff people can eat. And I think that we should probably somehow realize that more than we do. I really do think that a field is more important than a house almost. I would also say that I don't have a lawn. I've never had a lawn. I built my house, and I do not have a lawn now or ever. And you can pick a lemon out a window of most of the rooms in my house.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's have a motion, a second. No further discussion. Let's have a roll call.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
yes.
Okay. We're going to move on to the next agenda item, and we've been here 3 hours. Do you want a short break or not? If people are going to scatter? All right, let's do a quick, let's do this. If you'll sit down, we'll do this in a very quickly, if you want to hear it. Yes.
Thanks. I just, I'm sorry, but I just think we'll lose everybody. It'll be hard to get going and all of this stuff.
I think they were going to leave anyway.
Let's, I apologize.
Let's take a 5-minute break.
We're going to take 5 minutes.
This, I think, it needs to go back to the original word. So, if you want to do that, any of the members can move to reconsider and amend it, make a motion to amend the ordinance to go back to the original language.
Can Charlotte, who made the motion, do that, or you want me to do it?
Anyone who voted in favor of it, and it was unanimous, so anybody can make that.
Can I refer to you to give us the guidance so that I can make that motion? Why we have to change it? All right, so that's how I'll do it.
And there's a typo.
Okay, we're going to change it. He's Johnson. There. Okay, we're going to have to make a modification. You need to hear this. Okay, hold on. No, you're missing one. Okay, let me, folks, if you just take a seat or hold your conversation for a second. Gentlemen, all right, gentlemen, the board is back in session. Gentlemen, the board is back in session. Before we deal with the second item, Al has got some information for the board. Okay, we can't hear you. Jessica, you got to put his microphone on.
Yeah, it was brought to my attention during the break that in all of the redrafting, we may not have captured what is, I think, the intent as expressed both by staff and the board with regard to Article 2, Paragraph D, and this has to do with the effective date of the transition of all agricultural operators to an efficiency allocation. And so I wanted to bring that issue to your board's attention.
What's the fix?
The fix would basically to go back to the original language at the beginning of the provision, which is to say for reported extractions starting on August 1, 2014, and then to delete the reference to that date in the body or online 6 of the paragraph.
Can you read it in the record really clearly? I mean, it seems to me we don't want to, I mean, it seems that we want to get it right here today. We could just do a motion to reconsider and adopt a revised ordinance.
John Matthews brought this to our attention. He said in his statements that if we adopt this IAI begins effective today, and that's what I corrected him on and said, no, it begins on August 1. And I think that's what your issue was, John.
I thought I don't speak very well, but I thought I made it relatively clear that what you were adopting today would require Pleasant Valley tomorrow to be on ag efficiency.
And I corrected you on that and said no.
And everyone said I was wrong, and I apologized. That's why I was really.
Yes.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but this is the type of situations we get in where we just have to reconsider stuff. I think if you read it, I think Al agrees with me now that we have to start being efficient tomorrow, reporting on efficiency tomorrow. We cannot do it.
No, I understand. So we're going to correct.
Yeah.
Tell us how to fix it.
We want to fix it.
Well, I told you how to fix it. I mean, don't adopt the ordinance.
No, okay, yeah.
I'm not trying to be clever.
I know,
I'm just saying, you have, in my humble opinion, this has not been well cooked. I mean, it's gotten us, I agree with the Love Fest today.
Do you have any suggestion for paragraph D under Article 2 that
What I
would
said-
make it so it doesn't start tomorrow? That's my
Well, it could
specific
start
question.
Sunday, but I don't think that's a good idea either. I mean, August 1st would be a good date. I think, I've said, I'm not going to be pinned down to a date. You guys pick the date, but do
Okay.
it right. If you don't intend it to be what it says, change what it says.
Okay, all right. Al, what's the wording you are recommending to the board?
The recommendation would be to go back to part of the original language, and so it would read, for reported extractions starting on August 1, 2014, all agricultural operators' extraction allocations, regardless of type, shall be replaced with an annual efficiency allocation as provided in Section 5.6.1.2.
So we're simply unstriking the words "for reported extraction starting on August 1, 2014."
And we're striking the first sentence there,
Correct.
or the
All
first
right.
clause.
And
Is that right?
That's correct.
So we're striking the first sentence, "for the duration of this emergency ordinance," and we're replacing it with what was striked, "for reported extraction starting on August 1, 2014"?
Correct. And in addition, striking the language that was added to line 6, which reads effective on August 1, 2014.
Say that again? Redact that?
Yes, the language that's added, which reads effective on August 1, 2014, would no longer be necessary, and so that could be deleted.
Okay, so all right, so the way it'll read now is, for reported extraction starting on August 1, 2014, all agricultural operators' extraction allocations, regardless of type, shall be replaced with an annual efficiency allocation as provided in Section 5.6.1.2 of the Agency Ordinance Code, except that an annual irrigation allowance used to calculate the irrigation index shall be adjusted downward 25% from the allowances set forth in Resolution Number 2011-04, Exhibit Number 1. For computing the irrigation allowance, the definition of planted acreage may include designated areas that grew irrigated crops in the 12 months prior to August 1, 2014, but that have subsequently been fallowed or are growing a non-irrigated crop. Is that correct?
Well, I think you added a that, but...
Oh, I misread.
Al?
The word "except" doesn't make any sense in that you made that change.
Well, the intent, again, if it's not the way it reads, is that well, it was an exception from 5.6.1.2, which has a formula for calculating irrigation efficiency. So this is just modifying that.
So
I think it's fine.
the changes we're going to make is we're going to delete the "for the duration of this emergency ordinance," replace it with "for reported extraction starting on August 1, 2014." Delete the words "effective on August 1, 2014," and the rest of it will be as written here, correct? Okay, who wants to can we make a motion to do that?
I think officially you have to make a motion to reconsider, right?
Right. A motion to reconsider and then another vote on the
Move
revised
to
language.
reconsider the previous motion.
Second.
Okay, and let's do that as a roll call, please, so there's a record of it.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay.
I will move to adopt emergency ordinance D that was circulated late this morning with the following exceptions. In Article 2D, to change the wording to read in the manner that Chair Mulhart just read it, and to still have the two ands under Article 2H, 1 and 2 be replaced with the words or.
Okay, that's the motion.
That's the motion.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Let's have a roll call on that.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's done. Let's move to the next item, the review and approval of a long-term planning and development measures to ensure long-term sustainable withdrawals. I may have not read that correctly. And Jeff, if you don't mind, I'll turn it to Steve since he was the primary author of this letter, or do you want to let Jeff go through it?
That's fine. I think this is brief, and I'm just trying to see if other board members, and appreciate Chairman Mulhart reviewing this with me. As we went forward, we've talked about the next step, and we've been real clear that the ordinance that we just adopted is temporary, and so it seems most appropriate for us to identify a clear process that this agency is going to engage in to get that input. It doesn't stop anybody else's stakeholder processes, input processes, et cetera, but it makes it clear to them where we're going to be as a board in terms of looking at this. It's laid out monthly, so it's just clear and clean, and people can kind of get into a rhythm. It has a basic process, which is staff comes up initially with a draft straw man sort of for us to react to. That comes to this agency board hearing, and people can give us input, we can give input, and we can say, okay, this is what we're going to send out. We then send it out to all of the stakeholders that maybe couldn't show up and say, this is, for example, on the first issue, this is the list of potential issues that we think in the long run have to be addressed. Not that we're necessarily going to address them all, but in the long run need to be addressed. We let people react to that. So people sort of have two shots at it. They know we're going to come up with this draft thing, and we encourage people to contact staff even beforehand to do that. And then any final decisions that we make, that comes to staff. And the only thing I suggest is it may make sense for us to change it from 3 weeks to 16 days, because that way people would get it back on Friday. Staff would have time to actually digest that input and bring us something that maybe they've had a little bit more time to react to people. But I would certainly, in this process, encourage people not to wait to the last minute. They know we're doing this. They know the month of July we're going to be talking about whatever is scheduled, and to get us their input early. And then we adopt something. This is not a process where we're trying each month to say we're all going to reach consensus on these issues, but it's to try to make sure that before we adopt a solution, everybody's had an opportunity to do what John Matthews just said, and that is make sure all the unintended consequences are thought through, but people get a chance to raise all of their issues. And with that, I would just offer that there's 7 meetings here, and I would propose that we start this with the May meeting. It's too fast to do this with the July meeting for everybody. We start this with the May meeting, and people can just fill this in. The one problem I see is that we're dark in August. I would propose that we shouldn't be dark in August. We have a lot of work to do, and we should just go ahead and meet. The board is dark in August, but I'm willing to stay here and make sure that we get this right. And that way, because if you take the month off, it kind of throws everybody out of rhythm and everything else. We just want to get into a rhythm here, have this make sense. And so I couldn't find our November meeting.
What we do is we combine, because our November meeting is in Thanksgiving, and the December meeting is in Christmas, so we have one meeting in December. That's how we've done it in the past.
And what I would suggest is we have a November meeting like the 3rd week in November before Thanksgiving, and we still have a meeting in the middle of December to finish. But I'm certainly if the board wants to just have one meeting in the November, December, then that means our final meeting of this would be January, which is fine with me also.
If we started, you said start in May.
If we start in May.
May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, together.
No, but this will be a recurring process, so you may have issues that come up in May and a different set of issues, so you're working multiple, every problem that comes before us, and I have questions on the word ever, but problems that come before us, we'll go through this process to see if we can get this down to a more reasonable sequence of events to get things solved and people know what's coming up.
It seems like an awfully long period.
But yeah, I mean, we could try to go faster, but I really feel like we've kind of run everybody hard, and it's sort of like I want to try to stride out here now, it's sort of like I'm not, hit a stride. If I could, though, and answer your question about November and December, the way I see it is meeting 1 is May, meeting 2 is June, meeting 3 is July, meeting 4 would be August, meeting 5 would be September, meeting 6 would be October. You're right. Meeting 7, I just did my math wrong, right? So our November, December, so we would be done in November, December if we held a meeting in August. So that's for discussion purposes, kind of kicking it out there, but I think it's healthy for everybody, and I think it's would be consistent with concerns people have that we're trying to adopt the emergency ordinance and then we don't really want to do anything else and just leave it in place. A real commitment on our part that we're willing to engage the longer term issues that people say need to be addressed.
Okay, Mike, Dave, what are your comments? Charlotte?
My only concern is that we've got pretty much stakeholder fatigue at this point, and so it's going to be hard to get everybody on board starting a new project, but I think the concept is very valuable.
Well, in May, it's just that the list is brought to the board and sent out. I don't know that the stakeholders are going to be notified or meeting before then. I mean, if this starts the process, then it would start here, and they'd at least have a little bit of a break till June.
What my position would be is we ought to try this process as we've tried other things. We created the committee process to try to expedite things. Let's try this. Let's see if it works, and if it works, we'll debug it and change it. So we can do that. My other comment, having I saw this and having thought about it since I read it and agreed, it may be that this process, one of the statements you make after each of the meetings is, did you come to consensus and are you ready to act on it, vote on it? It's done. So it could, in theory, for example, if does the issue of authorizing an expenditure of $50,000 to Dr. Stiles, is that going to take us until November to agree upon? If it does, we're doomed.
Well, is that really an issue or a problem? I mean,
Well-
I don't see every single thing that
Okay,
comes to our
so-
board having to go through this process.
That's correct. So what I'm saying is we need to identify those that require a very little time and effort because it's so logical that it fits what we're trying to accomplish, and that would be one of them, for example, or putting together an ad hoc group of growers to work on the efficiency form, or but in terms of something that's bigger and broader and more complex, this at least lines out a beginning to an end that keeps us eye on the ball, and if we try it and it works, it works. If it doesn't, we'll adjust from there. So that's why I think a rough outline that Steve put down is valid.
If I could, there's two issues that you raised there that maybe, and one is there will be some things that will say, hey, we can actually get this done in the next 7 months. We'll have the information we need by November. Let's say that it's a study that's just, we need some short-term information. Other things we're going to say, hey, that's a study that's going to take us a year and a half or whatever. I don't know what's going to come out of that, but we will at the time decide, hey, we can bite this stuff off and we can't bite that off in terms of doing that. And the second thing, in terms of stakeholder fatigue, I really appreciate what you're saying. There's some, and that's why I'm trying to hit this balance between striding out and not staying on the pace we have been. But if we inform everybody this is where we're going, I'm not sure that stakeholders have to sit here and heavily engage every month. Stakeholders could meet and say, what issues do we want to make sure? I could see in one meeting, stakeholders can meet and say, what issues do we want to make sure are at that first meeting when we identify issues? And what are the, and just do that with each one of these. They could do 2 or 3 of these meetings at one particular point in time. So I realize this is going to be sort of an organic process, but it strikes me as in the spirit of where we are and could conceivably help us, get to the next thing and be as open and transparent and as inviting as possible. And yet, let's say people say, hey, I'm burned out, I want to take off, we say, well, we're not going to have the whole process come to a halt because of that. We have a process that we need to follow to keep going, or else that's kind I mean, I've heard people say, some of their groups, well, we couldn't get these people to show up, and so what, we just kick the can down the road, and we don't want to do that. So, thank you.
I'm sure everybody's got some pet peeve also that they'd like to get solved, and this could be this would be a good forum for people to bring some of their special issues and get them agendized more easily.
And I hope that the focus is issues that help us get to the right long-term sustainable. I mean, the goal here is what are the things we need to do to get to sustainable, a policy that gives us sustainable yield. That certainly means everybody does have the right to raise all those issues, but hopefully the filter we'll use to say these are the issues we need for the...
Well, I can identify one real early, and I think Lucy's project brings it home. We need to look at the issue of trying to develop some of this water that is in various places, and there's some in the Oxnard, there's some in Somas, there's some in PV, and that's an issue that we really haven't as a group discussed philosophically where we're headed. And I think a lot of money and effort may be waiting for us to decide that issue,
And certainly a replenishment fee will be on the issues list. I can't imagine that it wouldn't.
Exactly.
But whether we get the replenishment fee language all through the state legislature
Right.
by December, then we have to see.
Well, one of the things, too, and I think Lucy's part of this, and Camarillo and Director Craven, there is stuff becoming available through Governor Brown's office because of this point in time, and perhaps before that disappears, we might want to assist some of our municipalities in getting some of their projects together. If we do it by endorsing it and maybe taking a group of projects or something that people have basically, I think the term shovel ready has been overworked, so some other term that describes things that could be accomplished in a reasonably quick time. I would see that would be a fun thing to get going quick because, if we can accomplish some water conservation or water capture, I think would be the biggest issue.
The recommendation is to review and approve the plan and process, direct staff to return to the board with implementation steps as outlined. Anybody have any comments? Steve.
Steve Bachman. I'm talking about a concern as we talked about this process at the LPUG meeting on Wednesday. And clearly, LPUG has moved part of the way along the road for a basin-specific management plan. However, everyone was a bit bothered about something that came up, and that was whether or not the East and South Las Posas Basin are in fact a separate basin, and how much connection they have to the rest of the aquifer. This is going to be extremely important in developing future projects, both on what projects would be affected that would go on in the East and South Las Posas, how they'd affect places outside of that, and then how projects or strategies that are for other areas would affect or not affect the East and South Las Posas Basin. In some of our discussions, I was a little worried because both staff and directors both made a statement that is scientifically, I think, incorrect, and that is, and it's the USGS and lots of other papers would back this up, that in fact there is a connection between those two basins.
Steve,
okay.
where are we going with that
Okay,
discussion?
we're going with this because I'm going to offer up something. Okay, so
Okay.
we think this needs to be one of the first things we look at in this planning strategy. So I've been offered up as cannon fodder by LPUG to put together information on this, all the information that we have, both from other reports as well as from observations that we can make from the database, because we think that we need to address this early on so we to see.
So you're supporting this?
I'm absolutely supporting
you
it.
didn't say that. That's what we're talking about.
Sorry. Supporting it, I'm just saying this is one of the first issues I think we need to discuss.
Okay, all right.
Well, and the good thing is, see, this is not a specific project. This is sort of a generalized thing we might never sit down as a group and discuss unless it comes to us in this sort of a package.
Okay, so the recommendation is direct staff to proceed with the implementation steps. One of the first steps is
is to staff to recommend issues and problems listed to the board, and what Steve is recommending, this is one of those problems that
Right.
needs to be on the high end of things we have to deal with.
He recommended it as the first one.
Yeah. So here's what, anybody else, comments?
I'd just like to make this comment. Oh,
Okay,
go ahead,
John.
John Christ, Farm Bureau. I just want to really quickly say that, maybe this time of day on a Friday after a very long week is not the time to bring up the subject of stakeholder exhaustion, but this does meet one of the objectives that we set out in our very early comments when this whole process started. We wanted to see an effort to address the short-term drought emergency, but also an effort to deal with the longer-term issues. So from a conceptual standpoint, we endorse this approach. We think this is a great way to get the ball rolling. And yes, Farm Bureau will continue to convene stakeholders and provide input, and we really appreciate the extraordinary efforts that your staff has made to accept that and listen. So thank you.
I appreciate that, and we will increase the budget for caffeine, as we go forward.
Pill form or liquid?
This time of day.
Oh, there's no coffee in
if we
Pratt's
could,
office. I mean, there's a real problem up there.
I would point out, there was a request that we actually create a process that everybody would know in advance what the process was, and that's part of what we're trying to do because people were uncomfortable with that. I'll let Lucy speak, and then I'll respond here. I have something.
I'm sorry. You just adopted ordinance, the drought ordinance E, and I have a question on we're not allowed to use credits. Is credits part of this process? The credit policy.
You'd like a discussion of the future of credits on the list.
Could I address that, Chairman Mueller? Because I think we've had two very sensitive issues that have been brought up. One, is the Las Posas Basin east and south, are they separate from the rest of the other basins, right?
I think the term was used universe. I think they were asking.
Good. And and credits, obviously a very controversial issue. So I appreciate that they've been brought up because it at least offers how I would suggest that we go forward, which is we're going to have a list of all kinds of controversial issues, and they're legitimate. And then we say the question that we should be putting on, and that we'd ask staff to put on, say, if we want to come up with good long-term planning for the basin, is this something we should invest time and energy in getting an answer to? I can't imagine that we wouldn't say, given how often Las Posas is the Las Posas Basin separate or not? What data do we need to be able to answer that question? How expensive would it be to get that data? How much time would it take to get that data? And then we got a game plan. We can say, all right, for our long-term planning, this data we'll have or we won't have in time to include it in any kind of solutions we would do in December, but we'll do it later. And the same thing with credits. What do we need? What information do we need? Number one, will addressing credits be part of that? So it will be very important. The issues framing will be very important in terms of saying, how much do we need in terms of resources? I thought it was really pointed out by Jürgen that we're going to have more staff if we're going to do this irrigation efficiency, but how much do we need in terms of resources to put this plan together? So all of these issues. So the fact that you brought these issues up allows me at least to clarify what I would see us doing. It would be not just, yes, we're going to do that issue, but what data do we need to do Las Posas? What data do we need to answer to make intelligent decisions about credits?
Okay. Anybody
Glad
else?
to hear that.
Thank you, Lucy.
Let me make a comment, and maybe we can put this to bed.
Okay.
Many times we spend a whole meeting just doing procedural GMA stuff, various reviews of various certain things, and they're probably somewhat required, but I think this process makes it pretty clear that we're going to have to modify our normal operations and allow sufficient time at our meetings to, cover these various things. I don't think these are going to be simple, quick things. So that's probably a staff thing to think about how we. There are fiscal reviews, for example, that maybe have to be changed in such a way that we stretch those out, or maybe do an annual versus a quarterly, or these kinds of questions. Secondly, I'm ready to make a motion if everybody will hear it. I would move that we, in concept, support Director Bennett's idea of long-term process to answer some of the questions about sustainable water withdrawals in the basin. And that, I don't know if I, word for word, what's here in the packet, but, in a conceptual, organic matter, that we go down this path and see where it leads us, and it's the right way to go.
All right, that's your motion. You want to second that?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, it's a second. Any other discussion? Let's have a roll call, please.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director Kelly?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned. John.
Good day. We got something done.